Welcome to a very interesting discussion where we hope to dig into why the plant medicine movement is failing. And I want to go ahead and dig into that, and hopefully people can see my screen. And we'll go ahead and start from the beginning. And I just want to emphasize that we have tried to share this event several times and struggled to get it out on YouTube. So it may be being blocked due to being named plant medicine. I'm not quite sure. We're still sorting that out. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leonora Russell, and I lead several different plant medicine initiatives. I lead Adapt-WA, which is a psilocybin legalization effort for Washington State, and a decriminalization model as well as far as our initiative effort. And then I'm currently leading a bill effort for therapeutic psilocybin only, which would be similar to 109 in Oregon that has legal psilocybin in place now through psilocybin centers. I also lead a 501c3 called Entheo Society, which focuses on plant medicine, community, and education. And I've been leading for about 5 years in the plant medicine movement. I started out as a therapist and a mitigation specialist and a CPS social worker, working for government and social services for about 20 years in the Seattle area, King County area, a lot of times with people who are civilly committed under Ricky's Law, and in our jails and our prison systems and in our court systems and on the streets, and helping those folks get assistance or working with different prosecutors and so forth to try to minimize the charges. But after a while, I felt like even as a substance use professional, because I was currently working at that time with Seattle Indian Health Board and providing chemical dependency services for predominantly people of color coming out of the incarceration system, I really felt like more and more I was slapping on Band-Aids and not really assisting people in ways that I thought would be most helpful, and just kind of a cog in the wheel. I'd also worked previously with Family Treatment Court, which was a project that was supposed to create great change in terms of getting families reunified who've had their children taken due to drug use. And I also worked for a couple of years as a substance use professional with women that had been sexually trafficked in the Burien area of Washington. And that was largely women, lower income women of color who had been sexually trafficked, and providing support to them. But I moved out of that kind of social services and government work that I was doing and moved into politics. And so had begun leading in the Decrim movement. And I would say that I led that movement in Seattle, which was the largest city at that time to have a psychedelic movement in the United States, as far as a city to decriminalize without big money and to decriminalize solely through grassroots efforts. And so I accomplished that and kind of got to the 11th hour and then kind of experienced a bit of a coup in that movement. And there was no formal structure in place. So had my email taken over, and I'm sure if any of us can experience what it feels like to be a grassroots activist, to have your email taken over overnight and lose all your personal email and have people hack your website and just kind of stab you in the back, especially as a woman, just because we haven't had a lot of women leading in these efforts. And I do think it's important and responsible to acknowledge that it's harder for women to break those glass ceilings. So just experienced a lot of challenges leading. And I saw people that I had worked with move on to doing more, getting more accomplished, having more money, that kind of thing. And as that was happening, I also realized they were failing, right? They were not seeing the whole picture. And just recently with this huge wave of folks not not doing well with the overall, plant medicine effort for the United States. We just saw so much failure kind of across the board. And then there was this very negative Washington Post article that came out with a quote from Mason Marks, and it just kind of riled me up. And for folks that know me, I'm often kind of like the problem child, in terms of I am openly critical about the movement, or I talk about sexism that I've experienced, or double standards, or I talk about controversial subjects like agent provocateurs in the psychedelic movement, at all levels, from the government down to the grassroots. And my experiences of leading like over 400 volunteers over 5 years, I've really, I feel like I have a lot of expertise and good political analysis of why the movement is failing. So that's why I did this particular talk today, which is called Why the Plant Medicine Movement is Failing and Why You Do Not Care. So let's get started. All right. This is just kind of like a little simple breakdown. If you're someone that is easily offended, this talk is probably not for you, because this is just kind of like my harsh reality check with the psychedelic community. And this is for folks who don't have the patience to sit through a talk or a lecture or a discussion. So I just want to kind of go through the basics so that if you can't stay for the whole event, you can kind of walk away with like the t-shirt version, which I actually hope to make into a t-shirt because I think it would be kind of funny. So these are like the 6 things that I would say are just screwing the psychedelic movement up, right? So if you care, if you actually are interested, if you actually want to know like why the psychedelic movement is failing, on a larger level, right? This is my free, you don't have to pay for it, free breakdown of why this is failing. And these are some harsh truths. So let's see here. Let's start with infighting. When I look at the psychedelic community and I look at like the Burning Man crowd, right, who it seems like they're wealthy people that have time to go off in the desert, and they're not coming together to build homes for the homeless or for those affected by the racist drug war, right? They're there to create very fancy toys and parties and fun, right? Kind of a hedonistic, or I always say that word wrong, hedonistic, experience, but we're celebrating wealth. We're celebrating white people partying. It feels like a high school popularity game. It feels like who has the coolest camp. And that's not really like this high school popularity culture that you see within the psychedelic movement of like who's cool, who's been canceled, who hasn't been canceled, who's at the top of the popularity, pie, like a triangle or something, and then who's been kicked down to the bottom, and who's been canceled recently, and who's the most woke. And it's just pretty obnoxious, right? And a lot of it, if you follow it, are people in power helping people in power. So it's kind of like the popular kids in high school that are helping their friends, and their friends are part of a select group. And then if you're part of that cool club, great. But if you're not, then you're just kind of a nobody, right? So that's just kind of a lame kind of aspect to the psychedelic movement. And I would say that it contributes to why the movement is failing. And then I have this comment on gossip and mean girls, right? So you get these mean girls in the movement, and maybe they're selling their chocolates in the underground, and they're considered like a shamanista or a curandera or, whatever, a tantric goddess or whatever. But leading these psychedelic kind of groups in the underground is not actually the same thing as being a political leader. And a lot of these women don't understand politics, and I'm not blaming them, right? Because I feel like our society hasn't encouraged women to understand politics or to take leadership roles in politics. So I think sometimes there can be meanness or jealousy there, but these women will then come and not support other women, or they will think that they understand politics, and they'll kind of bring maybe some of that woke ideology to the political sphere and say, well, you need to lead in kind of a talking circle kind of way, or you need to have the psychedelic movement be, supportive of all people and have, an indigenous person give their buy-in and do this and do that. And maybe they don't understand that sometimes when you're like writing law or something like that, yes, you can go to indigenous groups and receive feedback, but like sometimes they don't understand law, and they don't understand law and legal practice as far as how laws get laid down, and they don't even understand some of the basics, like the difference between an initiative and a bill, right? An example is I recently had a woman that had promised me money for my political effort. And when she gave me feedback, she said, oh, well, we don't want to work with you, or we think you're bad news, or we think you're poorly organized. And when I clarified with her, she was sending people to the wrong website, right? She did not understand that my initiative website was different than my bill website. And when I pointed that out to her, she said, well, that's stupid. They should be combined. And I thought, that's not actually how it works. Like when you have an initiative and you have a bill, they're both different political processes, and you actually have a different kind of clientele that you are reaching, right? An initiative is in a blue state, you want them woke, you want the hippie vote, you want the poly queer vote, you want the vegan vote, the PC person from Seattle, you want their vote for the initiative vote in a blue state. So you want your website to appeal to the social justice warriors, the far leftists, you know what I mean? However, for a bill effort, you want to reach the conservatives, because you can kind of consider that you already have the woke vote, as I put it, right? So you actually want it to be kind of boring, based in science, leading with Republicans that are supportive, leading with veterans, leading with conservatives. And you want it not to be so grassroots, and you don't want it to be kind of hippy dippy or seeming to be super liberal. That's actually not the demographic you're trying to reach. But this was not a person that was receptive to that feedback. And so where I say mean girls, it's kind of like those mean girls in high school that are like, oh, well, we don't like you anymore. Like, we've canceled you. And it's perhaps because they don't grasp the importance of the work that we're doing. Perhaps they don't grasp the importance of legalization versus decriminalization, and how vital it is that we get legalization out there. But these girls can be pretty mean to other girls, if you will. They are not, they act like they might be enlightened, but these girls in the psychedelic community can be vicious, right? They can take each other down and cancel you before you know it, before breakfast. And so that's something that contributes to that infighting. And then just general egos and identity politics. When we look at Massachusetts and what just went down in Massachusetts, it's like you do have various groups that are having their factions and are fighting and having their infighting and stuff like that. And a lot of times, they're excited, they're enthused about the psychedelic movement. Maybe they haven't had a lot of power in their lives, right? A lot of times people in the plant medicine movement have been motivated by healing, right? Well, who are the types of people that need healing in this world? Often it's those that are very broken, right? Very lost, very searching. So when they get a taste of fame and fortune and their 5 minutes on the television and their 5-minute interview with the local news station, they might stab each other in the back over that kind of stuff. And it might seem silly, right? But there's not like an overarching organization to it, right? It's just these various groups. And then you do have people that infiltrate these groups. And that's something that's not discussed enough. And these are people that I see creating chaos. And I've seen it for the last 5 years of organizing in the movement. So they could be creating chaos from high up and be lobbyists and maybe be in the hands of big pharma. I recently had a lobbyist tell me in Washington State about a Democrat who's on a lot of committees who's basically in the paws of big pharma. So in that case, are they working for the CIA? Probably not. Are they working for the FDA and like suppressing psychedelic medicine at a very high level in government? I don't know, probably not. But are they getting some kickbacks from big pharma and gonna like vote no on every psychedelic bill or not support any bill that comes up, even though they're a Democrat? Yes. That would be a big resounding yes. I just want to have yes, like blinking and big lights, so people clearly understand, like, your Democrats out there are not necessarily working for what the majority want in blue states. Like, sorry to break it to you. And then there's this issue that I continue to see within the psychedelic movement, which is you can't just trot out a vet at some, point in the process. You can't just say, oh, we're going to just trot out a vet, and that vet is going to make, just get in all the conservatives to vote with us. Like, conservatives need to be listened to. Conservatives need to be partnered with. Conservatives need to be heard, right? And acknowledged and understood. And so if you're only getting your news from MSNBC, NBC, CBC, like CNN, what have you, you're not going to realize that that people are not going to feel engaged with if you don't really listen to what they're saying. So I've done that deep dive as a bipartisan political leader, right? I've watched a lot of Sean Ryan. I've watched a lot of Joe Rogan. I've watched a lot of Ben Shapiro. I've watched a lot of Megan Ryan. I've watched a lot of Tucker Carlson. I've watched a lot of Candace Owens, because I want to understand the other. I am here for everyone. And so anyone that wants to shame me, like recently I heard that there was an email going around claiming that I had turned conservative and that I was friends with these really bad conservatives in Washington state. And at some point I just have to laugh, right? Because like literally every day there's like a new hit piece on me that I'm finding about, or a new canceling that I'm finding out about. And it's just kind of like, I mean, if they come for you, clearly you're gaining strength and clearly you're a threat to the system. So here I put kind of a little joke where I'm like, help me get on Sean Ryan. Just because Sean Ryan is pro psychedelics, his life was very touched by ibogaine healing. And I just think he's a cool guy. So there's another box I've listed, which is outside parties influencing. And that's like not just these rich philanthropists with big egos. And I said no sense of humor, because you do have rich philanthropists that, are trying to affect things. And maybe they're trying to affect things from a place of goodness. Maybe they're decent people, like, deep down. But, when you have power, when you have authority, when you have money, you incite fear in others. So even though these people may be out there and may be trying to help, and that's all well and good, and we need their money, and I get it, right? I'm not good at ass kissing, but those are the people that we need money from. A lot of the times they're the ones that give it. However, when you're wealthy like that, or you're powerful like that, you rarely get like very, very honest feedback. Like most of us, like our husbands or our wives or our kids or our friends, they'll tell us like, hey, I think you've lost it, man. Or I think you have gone off the deep end, or I think you're dead wrong on this, or you're a bloody idiot, or whatever, right? And we might disagree and say, I'm not a bloody idiot, whatever. But we have those people in our lives, and the more powerful you get, the more money you have, you're getting less of that honest feedback that we all need in order to grow and stay on track and be successful. So I would suggest that it can cloud the picture sometimes. It's almost like we would be better off if we had individual donors that are supporting the movement, that are paying maybe like, I don't know, $1 a day to support the movement or something. But that way it just kind of evens the playing field. And you don't have these influencers that, they want to throw their weight around. They think that they know, or they think they have the right to be listened to. And sometimes they're misguided like anyone. And they're hard to rein in, right? They're hard to get honest dialogue with, because people tend to be fearful of them and wanting to make them feel better about themselves and compliment them and so forth. Big pharma is definitely influencing the scenario. I mean, I've had some really weird stuff happen in my organizing, and I don't know if, like, I don't know, Johnson and Johnson is like infiltrating my organization, but I've just had some really weird stuff happen. I just feel like people like need to realize that. As far as agents in the movement, it's funny to me that this is like such a taboo topic, because like one conversation I had with a lawyer in the movement, he had told me that he had done his dissertation on Martin Luther King Jr. In his like graduate studies. And I had said to him, oh, well, did you know that like Martin Luther King Jr.'s best friend was an informant for the FBI, and the MLK Jr. family like received a payout from the FBI basically because the FBI assassinated him and infiltrated the movement. And he's like, oh, no, that's not true. And I was like, how could this guy do his dissertation on MLK Jr. and not know this, right? And I just kind of find that liberal, pompous bubble a lot in the psychedelic community, where I'm like, when I go to white old man like psychonauts that are like super hippy dippy, and they're like, oh my God, this is such a great movement, and like everyone's so lovey dovey, and like let's do our underground circle, like Eric Swenson with his plant medicine community. You know, these are people that like normally I respect, normally I have a lot of admiration for. I'm like, oh, you know, they've gone before us and so forth. But I'll come to them with concerns and I'll say, you know, this is my lived experience. You know, if you compared it to a rape, right? It's like a woman coming to you saying, hey, I've had 400 lovers, right? But like 5 of them have raped me, right? And to have, to say like maybe 5% of the people I've dealt with seem a little sus to me, right? It seems like a little bit of a organized takedown. Seems like people come in and they fuck up your website, or they screw the pooch on something really important, or they end up leaving quickly after spreading all this like defamation and character assassination. And, you know, it just seems like a coordinated takedown sometimes between 2 suspicious people. So when you shared those experiences, right, and I'm talking about like 5% of the 400 hippy dippy lovey dovey plant medicine people that I've dealt with, right? Who are their own special characters, mind you. The psychedelic cats in the movement are certainly their own special breed. They have their own issues. But so when those kinds of things have happened and I've gone to someone like Eric Swenson to talk about those things, I'm generally not believed, right? They're like, oh, so-and-so, he's such a nice guy, or so-and-so, she's such a nice woman. Like you must be wrong, right? You must be wrong, and you must be crazy, because crazy is kind of like what the label we put on women when we don't agree with them, right? So I haven't really had great experiences of coming to my community and saying, hey guys, like, you know, there are agents in the community, you know, just so you're aware, because a lot of these kind of glassy eyed hippies, they just don't see it as a war, right? They don't see it as, hey, guess what, guys? Big pharma and big prisons and the court systems and all the like fake addiction services out there that like only work for like 5% of people that are huge money makers. You tally up the prison system, big pharma, addiction services, failed addiction services, rehab, mental health services that really don't help, you know, everything that's kind of like stuck on people being sick with low self-esteem and not enlightened and not questioning the system. I mean, they want to keep people suppressed. They want to keep people sick. They want to keep people mentally ill and addicted, because then they're not fighting for a democracy. They're not fighting for truth. They're not fighting for a better life. They're not fighting for their own rights. They're certainly not fighting for anyone else's rights. And they're sitting in front of their TV, you know, munching on their chips. So this like war that's going on is actually like pretty serious, and you do see a coordinated effort now taking place more than ever to break the movement, to define the movement as silly, or define the movement as ineffective, or to define the movement as a bunch of idiots, right? So we as a collective, as a psychedelic community, are not getting ahead of that. We are not getting ahead of these issues. We are sitting on our duffs and we are doing the infighting, right? or we are arguing over things that really don't matter, or we're getting caught up in like leftist ideology that would drive anyone away because we're just so in our little bubble and we're not allowing it to get to the people that really need it, right? The people in the prisons, the people on welfare, the people on Medicaid, largely people of color and poor people that are not going to be able to get to your, enlightened little Decrim, ceremony that's on the coast of some remote island. Like they're not. And you can tell yourself that the Decrim movement is non-racist and for the people, but it's really not if you look at the numbers that are going to be affected when you're facing a fentanyl and mental health and drug addiction crisis like no other in our nation's history. And you think about the crisis that we're into and the number of people that are dying a day, particularly the poor and people of color, and how many people we have in our prison systems that are currently suffering, and just addiction and how much it has a grip on our nation. So I would say no. I would say Decrim is like a false flag, if you will. It's like a false ideology on what it means to get these medicines to people who need them, and that people get to feel better, and it's kind of been stamped with like an indigenous like seal of approval or something, and they can feel more morally superior to those of us who are focused on legalization. But it's all just kind of a cop-out in my opinion. And I say that being someone who's led in the Decrim movement, I say that as someone who does include some decriminalization in my initiative for legal psilocybin, but I'm not leading with Decrim, and I'm not doing any effort that's just Decrim. So screw Decrim is kind of my current ideology. Mind you, I am including Decrim in my initiative. So let's see here. So we talked about outside parties influencing. We talked about big pharma. We talked about agents infiltrating the movement. We talked about people being blind to that. My little story I was getting into is that I go to these kind of like white men psychonauts with like my concerns about people infiltrating the movement and that kind of thing. And my lived experience with this, right? Like really shady stuff that goes down. And I'm like, it's hard for me to talk badly about anyone. And I'll be like, hey, this person is doing this weird stuff or doing really strange stuff, or let me show you this 10 things they've done that just seem like they're sabotaging us. And the reception I get from like those old white male psychonauts is like, you're crazy, you're paranoid, Leo, just really sexist, like mentally ill shaming. I don't know. It just seems to be like this thing we do to women in politics. So what's interesting is when I go to my Native American, been in the activism lane for a long time, their family has been in that lane for a long time, those people that we have on our board that are like, we're part of the American Indian movement, and we're part of like the standing rock movement and just different activism related stuff. They will openly say back to me, oh yeah, we had some FBI agents we had to throw out of our movement, a couple years ago, and this like Native American like water rights activism work. You know what I mean? So it's like, not only are they acknowledging my experience, they're saying, oh, we had some agents and a whole bunch of us Indians had to throw them out because they thought they could infiltrate, and we recognized that they were FBI and we got them out of there, and everyone agreed on that, right? Or like I'll go to the head of HempFest, right, Vivian McPeak and Douglas Hyatt, and they'll talk to me about like, people putting things in their mailbox, people harassing them, tapping their phone. They request a FOIA request like from the government about like any kind of surveillance, and they'll get a huge file on themselves, right? So people will bug you. People will infiltrate your movement. Like this is what we've seen with cannabis, with the cannabis movement, with HempFest, and we're seeing it in the psychedelic movement. So as soon as we can take off those blinders, the better, and just openly acknowledge that it happens. And then the other lady I was going to mention was Claretta James, and she's on our board for my ADAPT effort, and she is a public defender, but she grew up in the Black Power movement, right? The Elijah Muhammad section of the Black Power movement that was kind of initiated by Malcolm X. And, when I come to her with those kinds of concerns, she doesn't meet me with disbelief. She doesn't meet me with you're crazy or paranoid, Leo. she says to me, oh, that's how they took down the Black Power movement. They infiltrated from within. You know what I mean? She's right there with me, like, sister, I hear you. And I experienced this, and I grew up with people actively talking about people that infiltrated the Black Power movement to spread division, to spread disharmony, to do character assassination of leaders, right? So that leaders don't gain power. I mean, it's done by the KGB. It's done by every political group. Even conservatives talk about it having been done on January 6th, as far as FBI agents inciting violence or doing something along those lines. So I think it's pretty prevalent, and I think our greater society is more aware of that. But because plant medicine folks are kind of in their own little bubble of like, I just don't think they think about like evil and like how people can be so corrupt and coordinated in their attack to bring down a movement, right? A counterculture movement. They think of themselves as healers. And so they don't necessarily think of themselves as being political activists. But what I tell everyone is you should be thinking about that the FBI has a file on you if you're a political organizer in this space in any way. And you should really be thinking very intelligently about what your file says about you. You know, a wise man knows what their weaknesses are and knows what their like Achilles heels are. Like we all have Achilles heels. So maybe pride is your heel, or vanity, or your reputation. Like for me, if I'm looking at my file, I'm like, oh, this lady really cares about people of color. So like if you sent a person of color in and then told everyone that she's racist, and had that person like lead the group in a huff, then you're now creating this narrative that she's racist. That's going to get under her skin because clearly she cares about like combating racism and having an equity-based organization that allows equal access and equal representation for people of color who have been discriminated against. You know what I mean? So that would be in my file, right? And I can think of several things that would be in my file. One of them is actually my droopy eyes that I have related to my myasthenia gravis disease. And recently another woman in the psychedelic movement, and I have proof of this, she came for me in a public group. Now she got thrown out of the group, which is rare because I'm used to people ignoring these kinds of attacks on me. But this woman came for me and attacked me. She said all these horrible things that were not true, right? Like things that might be a warning flag to some people. Like if someone's coming from that plant medicine space, why are they talking like that? Why are they speaking so rudely and so meanly to someone else in the psychedelic movement? Because if you're truly motivated by like that beatnik love, hippie love from the 60s, like the true essence of the movement of the plant medicine, you are not going to be inspired to be cruel to others. You are not going to be inspired to be mean and take down others in the movement, certainly not other women, and speak disrespectfully to them, right? So after this kind of like, I would just say general takedown of me that was filled with vitriol and meanness and cruelty and lies, she got to a point where she actually made fun of my eyes. And so that was like a little reminder to me of like, oh yeah, like I'm not saying necessarily this woman, but like the fact that she's coming for my eyes was a critical aha moment for me, because in my file is probably like, oh, she once thought she was a great beauty, right? And she's lost that beauty related to her disease, and like, you know, it gets under her skin. And so that's a way to like kind of poke her, like poke the bear. So I just think all of us who are in the psychedelic space need to know, if you are any kind of leader, how is someone going to poke your bear, right? Like how is someone going to get under your skin? And know that, so that when you're interacting with people and someone or something happens that seems to be poking the bear, that seems to be like your top 4 things that are your Achilles heel, where people really get you to react impulsively, react out of anger, it'll squash your joy bubble, as I call it. Like those people that are those moments that just deflate us, and then we say, oh fuck it, I don't want to lead in the psychedelic movement, or who needs this, it's too much of a headache, or no one's ever satisfied, and they're always going to claim that I'm racist or something. Then it's those moments that you can then be more self-aware, because you can be like, oh, I could be getting triggered here on purpose. It doesn't mean that everyone's a fed, right? But it could be that someone's influencing someone else or influencing your group. Because sometimes to spread mayhem, you just need to plant some gossip, right? Plant some gossip, make stuff up, do whatever you got to do. But just know that, evil's out there and pay attention. So let's see, what else? We are satisfied with Decrim because Big Pharma loves for us to be satisfied with Decrim, right? We are these passive hippies who now we can brush ourselves off and say, oh, I did it, guys. I got Decrim. I'm a, psychedelic leader. Woohoo! What a revolutionary am I? And then go back, right, to their sequestered little communities where I highly doubt there will ever be allowed, even if it passes on a state level, an economic system for Decrim that the federal government does not shut down. So I think it could be like 109 and 110, where it passed in Oregon, and then you see later on stuff come along to really limit it and squash it and get it down. So I just want folks to be aware of the fact that they want you to be satisfied with Decrim. They want it to be a moral and ethical and racial issue so that you will hide out with your Decrim buddies and tell yourself that you're somehow morally superior to the legalization movement, right? So these, the people in the psychedelic movement can be lazy. They can be accustomed to a certain amount of privilege, right? Like their ass is not sitting in a halfway house where they'll get busted for doing psychedelics. Their ass is not sitting in a prison, right, where they can't legally do psychedelics. And Decrim doesn't have much legal teeth, if any. So it doesn't cut into Big Pharma's profits. It doesn't cut into Medicaid's profits. It doesn't cut into the addiction industry's profits. It doesn't cut into the cartel's profits because less people will be on drugs. It doesn't cut into the alcoholism industry's profits because people will still be drinking alcohol, because it's not going to reach enough people, and you're not going to reach the people that are poor and people of color that are in systems. And when I say in systems, it's like if you are on welfare and you don't have money for the Decrim deluxe retreat on the weekend, right? You're living in the ghetto. Like, it's just not a culture that you're going to be able to relate to. You're not going to take a bus there, like a bus pulls up in the ghetto to get their 10 people of color that are poor from the ghetto and bring them out to the retreat center. It's just not really a viable model that's going to be culturally simpatico with people that are in the system. And if you really haven't dealt with a lot of people in the system, they've been institutionalized, right? They become part of the system. And so you need to bring the medicine to the system to reach the people that are in the system. So I lose patience with these people that are, I've literally had a woman contact me in the psychedelic movement and threaten me and say to me that I need to disband my legalization effort. This is a woman who the Decrim folks love, right? And they think she's fabulous. And it's like, I would never tell another psychedelic community to disband, right? And I think I've gotten to a point in my own career where I used to be much nicer. I would just keep these assaults to myself. Just this past week, my husband was contacted and threatened via phone by someone claiming that they're going to drag his name through the mud and call him racist, right? And my husband is part African-American, so it's a little bit ironic. I'm not quite sure how they're going to twist that, considering his own ethnic heritage. But I think people just are not aware of how mean and how crazy it gets out here in these streets. And then I kind of kept that behind closed doors and not wanting to share that. And now it's interesting because I'm at this place where I'm like, well, I think we need to talk about how crazy it gets. I really think we need to start talking more about all these factors, right? Which is why I'm doing the talk that I'm doing today. We also don't really have a cohesive big movement. You can tell yourself there's an underground movement, but a lot of these people are capitalists. They have discovered nirvana, plant medicine. They discovered it works. Yay. They want to spread it to people, right? But they also want to make money, right? They're here to make money. They are looking for a salary, right? That's not a political movement, really. That's an industrious entrepreneurial movement, right, for psychedelics to benefit them and their homies, but also pay them, right? So that's not really a political movement. And so that's where I struggle, is like, we don't have a cohesive big movement. And until we do, the psychedelic movement is not going to be articulated on a political level and on a palatable nationwide level until you can get that big movement out there and get it to be visible and get it to be seeable, right? But right now, what the psychedelic movement does, like David Bronner and New Approach and all that, is they tout out these veterans, right? Or they tout out the indigenous healer for the commercial, right? To try to woo the populace with these boring, one-dimensional healing stories, right? And society's done with it, right? Look at just what happened with Trump, right? People are done with these one-dimensional healing stories of like, plant medicine changed my life. Plant medicine changed my life. Like, it's so one-dimensional, it's so boring, and it's a snooze fest, right? So what folks don't understand is we need an enigmatic hero. We need someone who's the flawed enigmatic hero. Someone like myself, I'm sure there's others, but someone who's very real, based in authenticity, and someone who rallies the troops with stories. And if you look at Trump, we got to see him through The Apprentice, right? We got to see him be a dick. We got to see him be real. We got to see him in a place of authority and calling the shots. And you have a sense of him because you have all these hours of stories, of documentaries, of things chronicling him and all his mistakes and all his goofballness and all his awkwardness and all his mishaps and all his mistakes, right? Because we're looking for people that are real. And I think that's where the psychedelic movement is missing the boat. They thought to be palatable to the masses, they needed to tout out these little figureheads, right? And it's like a wind-up doll. You pull the string and they say, plant medicine changed my life, right? Well, we're done with it. It's boring. And so what if it changed your life, you know? Because while you're sleeping, while you're doing your infighting, while you're getting fucked by agents or big pharma and the passive hippies that are harassing you for not only supporting Decrim and just not being politically active and just sit on your laurels and enjoy your entitled little chocolates until the feds bust you, while all that's going on and we are missing the boat on partnering with conservatives, what is the right doing? You guys, the right is smart as fuck. You know what they're doing? They are mobilizing. They are forming coalitions that are coming against the plant medicine movement. They have defined their spokesperson. They have been grooming this gentleman that started off working for Donald Trump Jr., right, and getting his lattes. Now they've got Charlie Kirk, and he is positioned in a very good space, and that's why you should pay attention to conservative politics, because what's happening with Charlie Kirk? Well, wake up, guys. Charlie Kirk is like the spokesperson against drug deregulation, right? He has gone on a city tour to all these liberal cities where you have huge populations of homeless crisis as far as the eye can see. Seattle is the third largest homeless population as far as cities in the United States right now, right? And so you show the lawlessness, you show the opioid epidemic, you show all the visuals, right, of this drug epidemic, and you're not showing the decrim, you're not showing the drugs that have been decriminalized in any way to distinguish, right? You're just lumping them together and making it a nice palatable meal for the voter who's fed up with the crime, fed up with the homelessness, fed up with the trank on their streets, fed up with their kids having to step over syringes and their homes being broken into and the police not doing anything. And now he's got a name for it, right? He's going to tell you all this lawlessness, all this homelessness, all this chaos and drugs and insanity, this mental health epidemic. It's all the liberal city's fault because this is what happens when you do any drug policy work. Right? He's not distinguishing between good drugs and bad drugs and how the opioid epidemic, the fentanyl epidemic, the trank epidemic could be addressed by these drugs that are good, right? Ibogaine, psilocybin, ayahuasca, bufo, like no, combo, no. He's not going there, right? That's not his message. His message that he's been handed by the evil overlords and the evil overlord heaven or whatever is go out there, make this message palatable, make sure people understand that all this craziness, all these drugs, all this bad, yucky stuff in the city, it's all the fault of these liberals, and they're wanting to make drugs legal. And he's not helping to distinguish that's actually not what these liberals are doing, right? He is not there to clarify what the liberals are doing. He is planting that message while the Decrim and legalization and plant medicine and new approach and all these little groups with their infighting and arguing over like who has indigenous right to claim if they can use ibogaine or blah, 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 and just like schooling each other and breaking each other down. And then the agents are in there, like all this gossip and mean girl stuff. While that's all going on, the right is plotting. They are smart. They're sending out their spokesperson. They are at the forefront of the message on drug policy. They are doing the real work of leading the charge and leading the narrative and leading the conversation and the discussion on drug policy while the rest of y'all were sleeping. So we got a problem. And okay, so that's the talk in a nutshell. But let's get going. Okay. I may need to take a break to get a drink at some point. But so here we are. I saw this article. It came out like right after the election. And I was like, oh, what a great article, right? And it's actually super negative. And if you go to the article, I mean, the simplified version is all drugs are bad and they're making cities gross, right? That's what's happening here. But that's when I saw Mason Marks's comment about like why the ballot failure happened for psychedelics in Massachusetts that New Approach supported and tried to shove down the voters' throats. And so we had just this very negative like lead on this whole article, right? So let me just look at this real quick. So state votes on marijuana and psychedelics signal drug policy concerns, right? And so in a nutshell, it's saying voters had these concerns that drug policies have drifted too far to the left, right? That's the message, right? Because of Charlie Kirk, because Charlie Kirk went out there and did all of this stuff, drumming up this narrative that the drugs that you're seeing on the streets that are causing chaos are the same drugs they're trying to legalize. No one on a large scale is differentiating for the public, speaking to the public. And when I say the public, I mean the conservatives, right? I mean the people that really swung this vote, right? And that's where the leftists in the psychedelic movement are doing no discussion. They're like, I refuse to talk to these people. I'm not going to have sex with them. I'm cutting them out of my life. I'm not going to see them at Thanksgiving. But these are the people that we need to reach, right? So it's actually very foolish to cut these people out of your life. Okay, so originally I thought all of the psychedelic efforts across the United States failed, right? That it was pretty much was a shit show and everything failed. And then I found out later like one or two did not fail. But here we have, and this is just a little conspiracy I have just because I like to play with like ideas about like, well, what would you do, Leo, if you were like, I don't know, the smartest, most evil person and had like endless opportunity, right? As you're plotting, right? As you're imagining, what would you do to take down the psychedelic movement? Because like, I don't know. I think about evil, right? I think about what evil's doing and what evil's thinking and what I would do if I was really smart and I was evil and I had like endless resources and endless money. So I just like to play with ideas. But just hear me out on this for a minute, and, you know, you can always disagree with me. People disagree with me, you know, every day of the week. But hear me out. This is actually a pretty interesting theory. If I wanted to make an example of what happens when we legalize psychedelics, not just Decrim, right? Because Decrim, I think they're going to let us have, right? In little bits and pieces around the country, they're going to let us have it because it's not a threat, like I said, to Big Pharma. It's not a threat to these institutions, the cartel, whoever that makes money off of addiction and drugs, and the court system, and the whole cycle of getting people hooked on these things, and the alcohol industry. So I think they're going to let us have Decrim. That's what I've observed. You know, the infamous they, whoever is running the world is going to let us have a little bit of Decrim, right? Because it doesn't cut into their bottom line that much. But if I were super evil and could control the world and influence things, then I might let Oregon be able to succeed with some of this drug policy, but craft it in such a way that I would like infiltrate the government or block things or do different things so that it only goes so far, and then it has like these epic substantial failures so that it's not set in place to succeed. You know, it's not set in place so that people will get treatment or be getting the support they need with this increased drug policy or liberalized drug policy or whatever. So it would just be interesting to me if I could look into some kind of crystal ball and could really see all the nefarious characters out there, whether it's big pharma or prison industry complex or the CIA or whoever it is, right? I don't know that it really even matters, to be honest. But I might, if I was like God and could let people, you know, control the world or whatever, and I was like evil, then I might let Oregon succeed, right? Just so that I could use it in a future article and say, look, it had this epic failure. Look what the hippies accomplished, those liberal freaks. And look at how they failed dramatically and how the populace hated it. And a lot of these conservative counties in Oregon ended up, you know, reversing 109, and they shut down 110, which legalized drugs and so forth. If these things were set up for failure, I want to give props to evil in this case if it was a coordinated effort, because it's actually quite brilliant, right? Because now in every fucking article from here until kingdom come, they can be like, no, don't you remember they tried to legalize drugs and it went so poorly. It didn't go like Portugal. It turned into a giant fiasco, and like America's just not ready. America's just not ready. You know, that's where we're at. And so I'm not saying that happened, but I don't know. It's just interesting to me. Now we've got this great little quote that's going to show up forever in every publication, right? Which is San Francisco and Oregon have become poster children for failed drug policies. And I almost feel like saying to these psychedelic activists, you should not be supporting cities' efforts to have open drug locations for any drug to be used. Because that's actually making these cities have a message of drug policy that is so liberal or so it can fall into mayhem and people can destroy themselves, and you're just like having a place for people to just like kill themselves openly on the streets. And it's unfortunately the psychedelic drugs are so linked with those other drugs in the public's eye. You need to differentiate yourself from that. Even if before you were a huge harm reduction activist, you need to understand that it doesn't feel fair. It's not the right thing to do, right? It's just the politically savvy thing to do, which is you need to find a way as a psychedelic activist to differentiate yourself from the open air drug market in San Fran, where we're just letting everyone kill themselves on the streets, because that is going to fuck your movement over. That's going to screw your movement over. You need to find a way to differentiate yourself from that and not necessarily be aligned with that and be wrapped up in that, because that will then define you, because those drugs have such a hard image to them and they make such a substantial impact on the public's mind as they're viewing drug policy as it plays out in cities. So I don't mean to be mean or racist or whatever, but I'm saying aligning ourselves with the harm reduction folks as it's playing out politically is actually to our detriment as a community. And I'm not sure if people can grasp that, because I feel like sometimes I speak in such a way that not everyone can, get it. So I don't know, maybe there'll be a Cliff Notes on Leonora sometime. So let's see. I mean, you have to understand who's making money off these drugs. You got the Mexican cartel, I just don't think people realize all the players at the table for keeping these drugs the psychedelic drugs away from the people. So what bothers me here is we get a lot of people that are like addiction and public policy experts at law centers, at prestigious institutions, at prestigious law schools. And I don't know, I just think we're kind of done in our society at this point with like these academics that are like in their ivory tower and just kind of removed from the street, removed from the grassroots experience of actually leading in this psychedelic movement, which is completely different than sitting in your ivory tower spewing out like clinical trial overviews or like criticisms like for the New York Times or something. I just think these are very different experiences when we're actually talking about the psychedelic movement and talking about the psychedelic revolution, if you will, counterculture, underground even. Let's see. The vote came after lawmakers in Oregon, blah, blah, blah. So they're really big into talking about how these other things were epic failures, epic failures, epic failures. Voters wanted more law and order, right? Because you're equating lawlessness with psychedelic drugs, which is a problem. But no one in our community is getting a politician out there that's like the psychedelic politician that's speaking to reframe that conversation and that narrative before it cements in the public's consciousness. And that's where we're at now, which is actually a huge problem if someone were smart enough to see how things are playing out. So basically they were just like, Florida's not going to do it. DeSantis said it was a bad idea. I watched a whole interview with DeSantis about the Florida stuff. I thought that was interesting. He and Ben Shapiro were talking about how it was so bad. They didn't want to become California. We don't want to be like California. That was like the big underscore for Florida. And that was how it was framed to them. And I'm not saying that particular ballot initiative or what have you, law to be put on the books was necessarily a good one, necessarily, as far as looking deeper. I just think if we're looking at the overview of this concept that the voters have turned against plant medicine and are no longer feeling in favor of it, even in blue states, I think it's important to look at that messaging as an overarching theme, right? So one thing that stood out to me here, is that now we have coalitions, and people were not experiencing that before when 109 was just getting its little legs, right? Growing its little baby legs. So now we have literally this president of smart approaches to marijuana, which opposes legalization. They're creating this momentum for an anti-drug movement, right? And he's saying voters are pushing back on rapid legalization of substances that opponents view as harmful for public health. Well, why do they think these drugs are harmful for public health? Because someone has painted a narrative and hasn't painted a narrative to the opposite, that these drugs are beneficial for public health, right? So they're framing the conversation, but you also need to recognize you are coming up against organized coalitions that are actively working against psychedelics and psychedelic legalization. They don't tend to be organizing around Decrim, and that really does tell you something. They don't see Decrim as a threat to them, to their industries or what have you, their donors. So then we had this great mystery, right? Like, why did Massachusetts fail, guys? Massachusetts is the home of Timothy Leary, right? I went to college in Massachusetts when I was 16, and I ended up dropping out. But like, yeah, it does tend to have a lot of liberals, and I think people think that like liberals just proliferate around Massachusetts. But yeah, I think there were several issues with that particular effort. But then we come to Mason, right? And for those of you that know, I worked with Mason in the Decrim effort. I used to be close friends with him, and now we're not close friends, but I certainly care about him still as a human being. Same for David Bronner. Though I have issues with both of them in terms of how they've treated me, you know, so I'm not discounting Mason's intelligence or anything like that here, but what I am saying is Mason is then like giving the definitive, right? Of like, oh, well, this is why it didn't work, guys, right? It's most likely because the public just couldn't understand a confusing, long, deeply complicated ballot. And so he's like, well, it was too complicated for the voter. And I don't mean to pick on him, but it's like, it just makes me ponder, like, well, why are these people like the voice? Like, why does the Washington Post, because it's Harvard, like it's that same old acumen of we're just giving our the credence of who has authority to, those establishments, that we think so highly of. So I'm just going to do this real quick. At first I thought this was a very negative kind of take on everything. And then I found this other article, and unfortunately the link isn't working here, but you guys can look it up. It was in USA News, definitely not USA Today, not going to get as much buzz as the Washington Post article, which kind of set the tone, which was everyone's moved to the right. Sorry if the psychedelic and cannabis people didn't get the memo, but everyone's moved to the right, and we don't want your lawless drug liberalized cities happening around the United States, right? Like that was the Washington Post takedown. And then Mason Marks says, oh, and it was too complicated on the ballot for people to properly understand. Okay, so Mason Marks is our resident expert on psychedelics, I guess, speaking from the streets, speaking from deep in the ghetto of psychedelic activism, I guess, and then also everything's negative and we're moving to the right and the plant medicine people just didn't get the memo. Okay, so then we take that article, right? And then slowly you see, oh wow, there were a few states. So in my negativity, I ran with that original negativity, but it turns out there were a few states that I believe allowed legalized cannabis. So it's not like a complete and epic failure, but it just feels that way. So but you can find that article in USA Today. So this isn't a perfect map because I didn't include Colorado in this map, but it just kind of gives you a sense of like, I don't think people really think about where we've had failures and what those failures mean, because for any of us, I like to think of failures as something that we can learn from, right? Like, well, if I fucked up, like, where can I learn from that? Where is there some piece of that I can go, oh my God, I totally could have handled that differently. How would I have handled that? Let me learn from that, right? Because none of us are perfect and we're going to make mistakes. And, mistakes are really often learning opportunities. So Massachusetts failed. I think we can learn a lot from that, right? I have a lot of thoughts on that, right? 110 was repealed. That was, I believe, legalization of all drugs for Oregon. That was voted in by the voters, right? But then repealed because of what came of that, which it felt like increased security issues and people they just weren't for it. They just said no, right? We just saw legal cannabis fail in Florida. And the psilocybin bill failed about 2 years ago in Washington State. I'm from Washington State. I have a lot of thoughts on that. And people don't always know because they always like laud 109 as like, oh, it really like set the tone and all that stuff. But 109 actually got repealed in a bunch of conservative counties. Those counties did not feel like their voice was heard. They didn't feel listened to. They didn't feel engaged with. And so they canceled 109 in their counties. So I really think that that's important to listen to because that tells me those conservative counties don't feel listened to, right? They don't feel heard. They don't feel engaged with. They feel like these liberal policymakers are literally just forcing their liberal policies down their throats with no discussion. Like, we're just going to throw money at this issue and make it happen, and so be it, right? Like, you don't get a choice. You don't get a decision, and people don't like that. That doesn't actually feel good. And if you feel the vibe right now in our society, it's very much like people want to be heard and they don't like being ignored. And if you're going to ignore them, they will let you know they're pissed. That's just kind of like the general vibe right now. I do find it fascinating that Gavin Newsom, like, even though California is like, this huge economy with so many liberal laws, that the issue of psychedelics is still not on the books there in a legal manner in any substantial way, you have to ask yourself why. It's just very strange to me that it would be blocked and handicapped and thwarted on so many levels, including by liberals that I've seen act out in very mysterious ways that always make me wonder, like maybe there's some secret agenda or something, because there will be people that are saying they're for decriminalization and saying they're for psychedelics, and then when they get there in front of that state legislature or whenever, they end up sabotaging, right? And sometimes I think we are afraid within the movement. I've had people come to me privately and say, oh, you know, so-and-so, they bombed in front of the state Senate. They screwed the pooch. They did something that really just made us all seem wacko or whatever, but they're afraid, you know, maybe that person's a veteran, maybe that person is a person of color, like whatever. They're afraid to say that openly to the group, like, hey, that person that we thought was so great, that we thought supported us, got up there in front of the state legislature and said something completely different, completely wacky, and seemed unhinged, almost like an MK Ultra experiment gone haywire. And for those of you who do not know the history of the U.S. government, CIA, that kind of thing, with the MK Ultra program, and then like all the offshoots of the different MK Ultra programs, you know, it's a fascinating way to educate yourself about how psychedelics have been used for brain programming and things like that. It also gives you insight into, you know, when people unravel in these kind of mysterious ways in the political realm, sometimes you have to ask yourself, like, you know, is there like a Neuralink controlling them? Or, you know, just that I think we're entering such a weird sci-fi society that when you factor in MK Ultra and you factor in Neuralink and you factor in like the latest in science and brain programming and social credit score and the NSA tracking everything we do, and just like when you factor in everything, it can feel pretty sci-fi. So you just never know. I'm just saying it's very odd to have these people that we think are going to be huge advocates. We think they're going to be a great speaker. We think they're going to be fabulous in front of that, you know, that legislative body and not embarrass us and really like act just like they've acted up until that point. But then somehow the clone malfunctions or something happens and then they do crazy stuff, weird stuff. And I think as a community, we don't often allow ourselves to talk about that. Like people will tell me behind the scenes, like, it's so weird that this person sabotaged this, or they said this and then they ended up doing this other weird thing that totally counteracted what they said that they were going to do. And, you know, and I just think sometimes we don't consider thinking outside the box. We're just like, oh, maybe they just had a bad day, or I don't know, maybe I got it wrong, but my secretary wrote down verbatim what they said, so my secretary agreed with me that they are totally contradicting themselves. But like, you know, just sometimes it can be such a mind fuck that you're like, am I crazy? Like, what's happening here, right? But the more we can talk about that stuff and say, hey, I don't care if this person is a veteran or a person of color or whatever, I'm going to talk about how they did this weird thing, right? I'm not going to be censored by a fear of seeming disrespectful because I care about the greater movement. And I'm just wondering, what the fuck, right? Why is this person saying they're for it and then getting in front of the California state legislature and saying, oh no, not unless we can have huge amounts of it, not unless it can be like astronomical amounts, right? And just making things tough and making things weird and making things so that they fail, basically. And maybe you have to like be into politics. I mean, I watch a lot of political shows, a lot of political dramas. I kind of look at how politics are kind of done. And people do sabotage things. This is my attempt at humor. You guys may not find it funny. I find it hilarious. I have to laugh sometimes, right? Because here I am out here in the streets, right, working with the psychedelic cats who are their own unique subculture. I can reassure you, I'd love to do some stand-up on it, right? But the psychedelic community is very, very interesting and challenging and weird and has some kind of specific challenges that I would say as far as leadership goes. but who are like the men, right, behind the scenes? And it's more than just Mason Marks and David Bronner, it's Rick Doblin, it's, whoever. But these are men that when I look at them, I'm like, wow, David went to Harvard, right? Mason went to Yale and now works at Harvard, right? And I'm down here like I'm leading in the streets, bro. Like I went to community college and I was a single mom and I once was on welfare and homeless and I worked 3 jobs to make ends meet as a single mom. Like I don't know if these dudes can really appreciate not only being female and trying to lead psychedelic cats. Mind you, psychedelic cats are the type of people, like I always say, they're the type of people in high school that like put their middle finger up at the principal and walked out and said, I need to be an individual, like, fuck you. So imagine leading 400 people like that, right? They all get to be individuals. They all are anti-authority. So it's a pretty difficult group to motivate and keep on task and, I don't know, stand up to and be firm with, right? Like a firm mother or something. I oftentimes feel like a psychedelic mother to a lot of psychedelic cats. I should do a painting like that because I also do painting. But anyway, so in this little comedy little sketch I've made here, Mason is holding all the cards, and David Bronner is not a revolutionary, not in the true sense of the word, right? He comes from privilege. He sits on a board and runs a company that is doing very well. It sells to Amazon. Mason is at the top of his career, getting featured in magazines, and is a doctor and a lawyer. And these are men that have privilege, right? I've got a disability. I'm a woman, and I have really been down here, kind of in the grassroots land, struggling to be seen and struggling to be heard, occasionally having a moment where I'm featured on a radio show or, something, but I'm in the streets and they're not. And so it does bother me that they are shaping so much of the movement, whether it's the intellectual perspective, whether it's the money being channeled into different things, right? They're shaping it. Rick Doblin is shaping it, right? But these are not grassroots activist politicians that are in the street with the homies, right? They are not organizing difficult people, right? That they're not actually doing any organizing themselves. Being an organizer is a whole other kettle of fish. And so it just does bother me that the Washington Post goes to Mason Marks for an assessment of what's happening. Doesn't the Washington Post care about what the movement is saying from the streets, right? Like who's speaking for the movement should really be the question, right? And I just know, like Mason, from my experience of being close to him, and of course he has so many attributes, but I'm not here to pump up Mason. I'm saying here's someone in an academic, elitist community, ivory tower, a person who doesn't really have a lot of psychedelic experience, to my knowledge. So when you believe that these medicines have touched your life, whether you believe they're spirits or ancestors or a higher intelligence or aliens or whatever you believe, maybe a part of God, these are experiences, these are conversations, this is an interaction with intelligences, right, that are changing your life and changing your who you are, changing the topography of your inner landscape. And so why are we letting someone who hasn't done a lot of these plant medicines speak for the medicines, right? That bothers me. On an ethical level, that bothers me, right? I'm just going to be honest about it. And also, it just reminds me, and I don't mean to be cruel, because I do kind of have this tendency when I'm being critical to sound like a bitch, and I don't mean to, but like like that nerd in the movie that's got like the big thick glasses, and they like want to be with the cool girls from like the cheerleading group, or the hippie girls with their beads and all that. And I feel like Mason is like sitting on the edge watching those cool kids in the underground, because he's not going to those ceremonies. He's not going to those tantric psychedelic sex circles, or learn about your yoni with mushrooms, and attending underground psychedelic 7-day retreats where everyone leaves crying and promising they're going to be friends forever and whatever the fuck, right? He's not doing any of that. So it feels like he's kind of like that dork, that little nerd on the outskirts, right? Looking in and wanting to be part of that, right? So he's doing the academic piece. He's writing about it. He's researching it. He's talking to the top scientists. He's submitting his publications to Wired magazine as being this psychedelic, like, revolutionary voice, or from an academic perspective or whatever, but he doesn't really have lived experience. And it is like that nerd, that nerdy kid, the square kid that wants to be part of the popular kids club, right? Because again, I feel like the psychedelic community is kind of burdened with this psychedelic popular high school kid vibe, and he's not in it, right? And I'm not even saying that's it. I'm not even saying that high school popular club, cool girls with their beads is the community, right? I'm not even saying that that's the community. Who was it? The comedian, I'm spacing on his last name, but he was making fun of the MAPS conference and how it had changed so much from like 20 years ago. Adam Strauss. And I just love him, right? Because he was just like keeping it real, and he was like, it's just not the same vibe, it's not the same crew, it's a different psychedelic revolution, different psychedelic community. You should look for Adam Strauss's commentary on the psychedelic conference in Denver, because he did some comedy there, and just did some real feedback, and had done some comedy for the MAPS conference. Okay, so moving on from Mason, and I'm not trying to make fun of Mason. I'm just trying to point out the obvious here, which is, why are we letting academics from elitist circles define the psychedelic plant medicine space, who literally have not spent a lot of time with the medicines, don't necessarily know the underground, haven't spent time like sweat and tears and crying and barfing and all of it in the underground, and yet they're the expert, and it's just this hardcore worship of academia and the name Harvard and the name Yale and all this stuff that bothers me. It just gets under my skin, because it just doesn't feel right? I just get annoyed. Excuse me. And I might have to get a drink here in a second. So if folks need to take a break, just feel free to take care of yourselves. Let's see here. It's just, my expectation is this turns into a podcast. People can listen to it at their leisure when they're in their bathtub and just relaxing. It doesn't have to be a heavy podcast. You can always like listen to it later when you're feeling up to it, because I'm cramming a lot of ideas into a short amount of space, and it becomes overwhelming even for me. So I totally get needing to take a break or what have you. So I think I covered some of this, which was like David Bronner, New Approach, Rick Doblin, like, are these people, like, I'm always interested in people's psychology. Like, are they enjoying this power? Are they enjoying being like this major figurehead in the movement as they throw their weight around? Like, I mean, probably honestly, yeah, because I think people enjoy power. It makes them feel important. It makes them feel powerful. But if you're going into a state that's not your state, and there's not really much of a legalization effort there, and you're like, hey, Decrim folks, I want you guys to like pretend to be about legalization, and I'll stick you on the TV and the local news and, really shine you up, and you'll have your chance at fame. And so these Decrim folks are like, oh, I can pretend to be about legalization. But if there's really no legal psychedelic movement in that state at that time, and you're pushing for that agenda, the state is going to react. The state is going to feel like, hey, Mr. Outsider, why are you in our space? Why are you in our space? And why are you rallying these Decrim groups to be the legalization face of the movement, or be leading the psychedelic effort on a legal level, and shaping the psychedelics of a state that's not yours, right? And what we saw with the Democrats was they outspent the Republicans by a huge amount, and they still could not get this election, right? So we've learned from this last election, you can't throw money at a problem and think that you're going to create effective, lasting policy change. We're just not there, right? We are in a different political landscape than your mother's political landscape, right? So you can no longer really buy elections, it would seem, right? I think the bigger issue that the leftist leaning psychedelic strategists, whether it's David or it's Rick or whoever, they need to be open to feedback and owning their mistakes, sure, but they also need to invest in real leaders, right? And when they are assessing if someone is a leader, it is not someone who is trying to get their plant medicine shaman workshop going. It's not someone who's trying to rally everyone for their particular podcast or something like this. They need to be people that they've assessed, whether they like them or not, as being adequate bipartisan leaders, right? They are not putting their money behind that. They are not putting their money behind people that I would say are political leaders in the psychedelic space that are bipartisan. I'm not just talking about me. I mean, clearly I want support. That's why I'm doing the work that I do in terms of asking for support, right? Because I believe in what I'm doing and I believe in the people that I'm leading and, that kind of thing. But I just feel like where you need to put your money is behind the leaders that are really doing the work. And you really need to understand, well, what is the work, right? I would say it's not the Decrim stuff. And I would say it's not having some underground ceremonies or having a psychedelic group just for Asians or just whatever, that it has to be someone that's there for everybody. Everybody, that means the Trump supporter, that means the black anarchist, that means everybody. And they have to not be in it for their own capitalistic gain, like they've got a personal project where they want to also be acknowledged as a great healer or something else. They need to be in the political driving lane because that lane needs to be filled, and it needs to be filled by a large personality, a large body. And that's what they are failing to get in their strategy. So I think I'm repeating myself a bit here with this slide, but Democrats in this last election, they outspent Republicans. So what did we learn from that? Money won't solve this problem. Okay. And again, when these people like New Approach and all that, when they tout out these professionals like doctors or medical professionals or whatever, they're assuming, right, that these Republicans or these conservatives or these middle of the road people that are being educated, the voter, about psychedelics and that kind of thing, they're assuming that they're going to be won over by the professional. And I think what they're failing to get, these folks behind these plant medicine strategies, is that people don't really care, right? If you look at conservative media, they are on a rampage, on a witch hunt for taking Fauci down, right? Because Fauci was lauded as a professional, right? And he told everyone to get the COVID shot, right? A lot of these people on the conservative side, they're pissed. They didn't want to take the COVID shot. They lost their job over not taking the COVID shot. They're mad at Democrats who push all this keep your laws off my body stuff, but don't seem to understand when it applies to vaccines and not wanting experimental vaccines on their bodies, right? So however you feel about the COVID shot, you have to recognize that there is a whole big genre of the population that has not been impressed by the so-called professionals who they see as culprits of a mastermind evil propaganda for big pharma that went down as like a medical emergency crisis that you had to get experimental vaccines over, right? So they're pissed, and there's some anti-professional sentiment out there. There's some like we don't trust you sentiment out there. So touting out professionals, you're not going to get the win that you used to, right? It's lost its people don't have the same sense of credibility in professionals that they used to. So somehow the folks running the strategy on plant medicine have somehow missed that boat, right? They've missed it. The other thing that you see a lot in the plant medicine community as far as like the legalization effort, even like with cannabis or with psychedelics in Massachusetts. And believe me, I'll be sending this video to RFK Jr., whose folks contacted me about asking for my resume. It would be great to be involved in the nationwide effort to try to help educate people from a bipartisan perspective and reach out to conservatives. I also will send it to Rick Doblin. I'll also send it to David Bronner. So I try to be very straightforward in my approach with folks. Like if I'm going to criticize you, I will do so and send you a link so you know why I'm upset or why I think, you need to think about what I'm saying. So I try to be very honest that way. I don't try to be one of these people that does all these like gossips behind the scene in the psychedelic community stuff. But anyway, these folks do a lot of this stuff where they go into these states like Massachusetts, they have like the 5-minute commercial, like New Approach handles that or whatever, and then they tout out the people, right, for your very quick 5 minutes of fame, 15 minutes of fame, whatever, and you tell your plant medicine story, right? And we've all heard it before, right? Because this has been going on now for 4 or 5 years, right? The plant medicine movement as far as the larger news scene, the larger news cycle, it's in the press, we're hearing about it, that kind of thing. And they give us they're still trying to get it over the finish line with these one-dimensional plant medicine change my life stories, which the public is bored with, right? We're bored. We know that supposedly plant medicine changes your life, but we don't have a real sense of it. We don't have a real sense of the movement. We don't have a real sense of the people. We don't have a sense of trust, of authenticity, because we don't have that history, the history of stories. Like as people became more and more acquainted with Trump, they saw more and more of him, facets of him, elements of him, right? Because they got to know him over the course of like The Apprentice for many years, that kind of thing. So when you just strut out someone and says, trust this person, their life is changed by plant medicine, you can trust them, they're a nice person, and their story is great, and it's the same old boring story of plant medicine changed my life, no one cares. No one cares that plant medicine changed your life. We've turned off from listening to people like you with your short little one-dimensional, very superficial sense of who you are, where are your faults, where are you as a character. We want more depth in our speakers. We want more authenticity, and we want more accountability, and we want to really get to know you, and we want to get to know you as an entire human, right? As someone who has faults, as someone who is real, right? It was the realness of Trump, I think, that appealed to a lot of people because he felt like someone that you could acknowledge as being real, that you had a sense of him in all his multifacetedness, whether you liked him or not. There was a sense of who he was, right? So we're not really getting a sense of who these people are. Like, do they fight with their husbands? Do they fight with their wives? Do they cheat on their husbands? Do they cheat on their wives? Do they like fashion? Do they shop at Kmart? Do they hang with bikers? Do they drink beer? You know what I mean? We don't know these people. So as a person listening to this, I'm not impressed by that because we've already learned people have turned off. They're not watching the news. Look at the news ratings. They're deplorable. People are not watching mainstream news. They have very little trust in our mainstream news. And you can say, well, that's horrible or whatever, but traditional news is dead. And these psychedelic strategists have missed the boat on that, right? Because when they're going out and doing their little talks on plant medicine changed my life, right? They are doing that from the perspective of going on liberal media, going on plant medicine podcasts. You're preaching to the choir, girlfriend. No, you should be out there on the conservative news outlets trying to have engaged conversation and making inroads with conservatives on conservative podcasts, on like Lex Friedman. Like, that's where you should be. I'm currently trying to get on Lex Friedman, but maybe I'll send this video to Lex Friedman. So the point is, they missed the boat. They screwed the pooch. They did a horrible job with this. I would give them an F for media, just like the Democrats. I would give them an F for media and an F for not realizing that people are just kind of done with these one-dimensional plant medicine change my life stories. They're no longer interested. That doesn't really interest them. You've lost the public's interest just by engaging in the same old, same old. The other thing that the leftist psychedelic community has done is there's a lot out there, and I've done it too, but I try to keep my stuff sequestered in Entheo Society. So I want to do an event on conservatives and the psychedelic movement, again through Entheo Society, but I've done stuff on trans people's voices in the psychedelic movement, and Asian people's voices in the psychedelic movement, and men's voices in the psychedelic movement, and people that are into UFOs and had spiritual experience with ghosts and things like that in the psychedelic movement. Like, I try to do like little different things on all different like little mini subcultures of people that are part of the psychedelic movement. But again, I try not to let those politics bleed into the mainstream focus of any political work that I'm doing. The political work that I'm doing needs to be bipartisan, needs to be just straight, needs to not be hindered with a lot of other leftist ideology, because the leftist ideology may be part of what's in my toolkit, or might be part of what's in my interest in terms of how do we uphold women, how do we uphold Black people, how do we uphold Latino people, you know what I mean? That may be something that's personally part of my wheelhouse that I'm interested in, but I'm not forcing that on the mainstream message of psychedelics. And if you are going to make it so people have to swallow both together, like you have to swallow that you're fighting for indigenous rights and environmental rights and LGBTQ rights, as well as your psychedelics, then you are going to burden it, and it's going to weigh it down, and it's not going to be as appealing to the mainstream, because what the polling has shown us from this last election was the border safety, basic safety, right? The economy, not being able to afford groceries, and this concept that men and women's sports and women and men's sports, that a lot of folks felt like that was such a minute kind of like novel area of interest, where only like 5% of, or 0.5% of the population identifies as trans. Sometimes what we do in especially Democratic politics is we don't do a lot of things for the middle class. We don't do a lot of things to actually change much of anything, but we'll like make one topic be like our thing, right? Like trans rights or something. And we're like, look, we're making progress with trans rights. That doesn't resonate at this point with the general population. And what Democrats would tell you is, oh, well, that means that the general population is incredibly transphobic. Or it's just not on their top 3 of what they're caring about, because they're seeing it as such a small percentage of the population. And why are we fighting over this, right? Like, why? Like, ask yourself why this is such a critical issue when there's so many other critical issues, right? Like Medicaid, or medical debt, or the level of sickness in our country, the level of disease in our country, education issues in our country. Like, why is this issue of trans rights, when it applies to such a small percentage of the population, now becoming this huge thing to kind of split us the way gay marriage did and the way abortion has? Like, and I think people are just kind of done with these topics like abortion or gay marriage or trans rights that seem to split us as a nation, when we have so many more things that we are aligned about that we're not talking about, and we're fixated on the things we don't agree on, right? And so I think that's kind of the public perception of what's going on. And so what we are forgetting as people that are liberal in the psychedelic community is you cannot take your liberal values and your liberal objectives and your liberal ideologies or your passion projects, right? Because you can do that within the psychedelic community, within the psychedelic underground, form your indigenous plant medicine coalition, cool. But as far as like the bread and butter of how to get a law passed and get it down the middle, you're gonna have to realize that burdening it with a lot of these other special projects and special political efforts, you're going to muddy the waters of the message. And that appears to be lost, I think, within the psychedelic community, in terms of organizing, in terms of politics, that kind of thing. So this is Leo's relatable goofball theory, which is, I don't care if you don't like him, I don't care if you love him, but why did Trump win, right? Why did Trump win? And you know, he brought on board people that until yesterday all identified, and some still do, as Democrats. So really, it was not so much an election of a Republican, because Trump used to be a registered Democrat. And back in the day, The View and others fawned over him when he was not running for president. So he's been demonized, I think, in a lot of ways, but if you look at his people, right, the key people that seem to be in his orbit, or at least some of the bigger ones, are people that are still registered Democrats or were Democrats until like yesterday, right? And so I think that's why you'll see someone like Joe Rogan, who supported Bernie and then supported RFK Jr., and now you see him supporting Trump, and it's like, you're seeing someone who's actually including a lot more diversity of thinking than prior Republicans. So I would even suggest that it's kind of like the new Republican Party. This is not maybe the old school Republican Party that your grandma voted for. And so why did these people win? There's a relatable goofball theory that I've got going, which is just that, you know, you see Trump dancing around, you see that he's the underdog, and and this concept of selling him as someone who's been hated and who's been attacked, and you know, and that he can hang with bikers, you know, he can relax and be dealing with that average Joe, right? The average Joe on the motorcycle from Montana, right? Can you speak his language? Can you connect with him? Because if the liberals are like, no, you need to come over here and talk about trans rights and talk about black people's rights and women's rights and all this other stuff to this person who maybe they live in an all-white community, and it's not because they hate black people, it's just because their community is all white, and they're not in that mode of thinking about diversity all the time, and they get offended because they want to talk about how they're going to decrease taxes in their small county or something. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes we are saying, the left is saying, you must meet me over here, and you must be as anti-racist as I am, or as anti-sexist as I am, or whatever. And there's this real demand that you must come over to what I'm focused on and what I'm thinking about. And maybe in that person's community, that's not the biggest issue that they have, and it's not because they're automatically a Nazi, right? Which is kind of like where the left is, which is like, oh, unless these issues of social justice matter to you, then you're clearly a Nazi. And it's like, maybe you're Amish and you're just kicking it on your farm in Pennsylvania, and you just want the taxes to be lower because you've already got your microcosm, right? And you're happy in your microcosm, and you're not interested in some liberal other world microcosm because your world is very small in that Amish way. I'm just wondering why it is that we're forcing people to then adopt our values, right? When some of that may be cultural and we're calling it Nazism, right? If that makes sense. So in my relatable goofball theory, why did the Trump win? I just see this theme of like, we want the underdog, right? Give us the underdog. Who do we have in the psychedelic movement that's the underdog? Who do we have that's kind of the hated one? Who do we have that's the unsung hero, the wild card, right? And who can hang with bikers, right? And then, like I said, this Charlie Kirk factor, I think I mentioned him in the beginning, but like, I don't think the psychedelic folks are paying enough attention to the Charlie Kirk factor and how brilliant the Charlie Kirk factor is. So I think I get to that in the next slide. You guys, if we could just take 1 second to break, I'm just going to get some coffee. Hold on 1 second. Excuse me, and it may just take a second because the little machine has to make it, but that will help me keep my energy up. But we're almost done, and looking forward to a great discussion. Where are we? Charlie Kirk. So Charlie, if you have watched him, which people probably haven't, but I meant for this link over here to work, and I don't think it's working. But this link works, and we can go to like one of his websites, I think, where he talks about, these streets, the streets of the cities that have gone mad with their drug policy, and where drugs go, and just painting this picture. Like, he went on like a 20-city tour with Trump, like stumping for Trump or whatever. And during that time, if you watch the video footage out there on him, and it's all over TikTok, he rips into these really stupid, like, like college students that are basically just like fresh out of high school. It's like he picked the most flustered, nervous ones he could get. Then he sets them up for failure, right? Because he does like a takedown with each one. He's like, why do you think Trump's racist? Give me 5 examples. And the person's like, I don't know, because the news told me. And he's like, the news lied to you. Can you believe the news lied to you? Because you have nothing to support your opinion, right? And he does the same thing about drugs. He says, do you know that drug decriminalization has caused like so much horribleness in our cities? And hold on just one second, I'm gonna get my tea, brother. Anyway, the tea didn't really work out the way I thought, but we'll just keep going. So, I mean, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant strategy, right? Because he's sharp, he's snappy, he's very good at like one-liners. And so you walk away thinking like, wow, like I said, he plants this seed of like, look at the lawlessness of these cities. Look around you at the drugs and all this. This is what's been caused by your liberal cities that have decriminalized drugs and legalized drugs. Look at the dirtiness. Look at the poverty. Look at your kids having to step over hyperbaric needles or whatever they're called, right? Like, he's just like, oh my God, it's disgusting and it's horrible. And you guys have let this happen. And because you've been duped by these liberals with their liberal drug policies, and we need to rein it all in, guys, and have some, have some common sense and get back to the basics of, the 1950s, where things were like clean and orderly and everything was very predictable, and there was not this unsafeness and the unsanitariness of our cities. And these families, right, with kids in the cities and all that, they're like, or the people in the country that are fearful of having their communities turn into this, they're like, oh my God, we're not going to vote yes on any drugs or yes on any drug legalization, because now they're thinking that all drugs, right, are causing this lawlessness, because no one is out there from our side differentiating for the public on like, hey guys, here are good drugs which actually could eliminate this whole crazy insanity of the drug addiction crisis we have, including alcohol addiction, including opiate addiction, including, all these people on meth in our communities, right? We have some drugs that will work for that, right? But we can't get them to you because people like this gentleman, Charlie, have linked the bad drugs with the good drugs. So we need to get in there and differentiate the two so that people understand what the good drugs do and what they can do. And that's where we're really struggling. And, I've got several ideas. One is I wanted help with the city of Seattle to do a basically like a drug center where we would be allowed to do entheogens, because the city had previously authorized the use of a free drug site in Seattle and then never actually actualized it. And I've reached out to public defense about that and so forth, and I'm just like looking for people to support me with that right now. But that would be a way to kind of inadvertently get around some of these laws, that because it was like an open drug site, you could then show, and you could have like cameras up and say, hey, we're just going to document everything. You could show people getting better and have medical staff and so forth, and show homeless and this kind of chronic mentally ill, drug addicted section of the population healing in significant ways, because Seattle in particular has a thing where they lock people up under Ricky's law, which is something that the taxpayer's paying for, but has like a recidivism rate like nobody's business. Like when I used to work in the system, I would have clients that would be in and out of these forced treatment centers or mental hospitals like 52 times. And they don't want to take the meds. You don't have their buy-in. They just get shuffled off to the street. They're a safety hazard. And a lot of them die and that kind of thing. And so it would just be great to have a method for showing folks, actually, Charlie is wrong, guys. We can show you that these other drugs that he's lumping in together with these bad drugs can help get people off of the bad drugs, but we have not been provided that opportunity. So if anyone wants to like reach out to me, my email, you can reach me through info@adapt-wa.org. That's one way to reach me. You can send me a message on Facebook. I'm just a little bit hesitant about giving out my personal email. But basically, this is a project that I want to work on, is this city plant medicine center to try to help with getting the news out about plant medicine in ways that are visible and create change and allow people to heal in ways that are significant, to try to illustrate to folks there's a huge difference between the drugs that Charlie Kirk is talking about as he lumps them all together in very dangerous and sticking ways, in ways that really stick in people's consciousness as they try to picture what does drug legalization or decriminalization look like. So this next slide is just kind of like, you know, a caricature of like what each side, if you will, is thinking about the other. And I've met these people, right? I've met these people on the right. I've met these people on the left. I'll work with anyone, you know what I mean? So I work with people that talk like this, right? I work with people that say legalization is racist, and I say, it's actually, I think, the other way around, but okay. And they'll say, I only want to work with people like me, right? And I'll say to them, I already have the poly-vegan, anal retentive person with changing their pronouns every week, like whatever, kind of social justice warrior with no kids, single person, extreme leftist, like woke hippie, whatever from Seattle. Like I have that person's vote. That person is going to be pro drug legalization. So when I try to explain to my folks in the movement like that, like I don't actually need your like political community's vote, because I know that you will vote that way when we get to the ballot box, right? Where I need help is I need to reach the farmer or the cowboy or the rancher or the person in the trades who is probably going to be watching alternative media, and they are probably going to be watching a lot of conservative media. And it helps if people on the left can watch some of that conservative media so that they can at least understand it's not whatever they think the soundbite is for the kind of the liberal left-leaning mainstream news take is on the conservative. That's not giving you an accurate picture of what those conservatives are really talking about, what they're thinking about, what they're feeling, that kind of thing. So even if you say to someone, hey, I watched Candace Owens recently, you're not saying you agreed with her, you're not saying you liked her, but that could be an inroad, that could be an olive branch, because then that person on the right could feel like, wow, you're someone who's open to Candace Owens. You didn't say you were open to Candace Owens. You didn't say that you're a fan of Candace Owens, but just by saying that you watched Candace Owens, that might open up a window of conversation with someone on the right who is feeling like these entitled liberals, they're kind of done with these entitled liberals acting like they're a bunch of Nazis and racists, right? So they've turned away from those liberals because they don't want to listen to them, because they think that they're judging and thinking they're better than. And if you look at who voted for Kamala, it was predominantly people that were college educated from liberal colleges in the United States. And that does have a specific mindset, right? Like pro-justice warrior, pro-anti-racism work. And not everyone comes from those spaces and has been educated in that way. Because whether you agree or not, liberal college can be a form of indoctrination. I'm not even saying it's bad indoctrination, but it can be a form of indoctrination, because a lot of us, before we went to college, we weren't aware that we needed to study, kind of colonialism, or study the colonial mind and so forth. So if we are judging the right-wingers for not being aware of all these things, they were also not indoctrinated. If you look at the statistics, they were not the ones who went to liberal colleges, right? And so at those liberal colleges in the United States, you get a lot of that education on equity and justice issues. So this does kind of make fun of both sides, I think, hopefully equally, because like the motorcycle dude is like, those pedos in Hollywood, they're like Diddy, and they're using psychedelics to, to kids. And like, some of these people really think that. They think that psychedelics are something that like the liberal Hollywood crew are using, and they're part of a sick network of people that are all about like hurting children and looking the other way, and Ellen DeGeneres and Diddy and J-Lo, they're all part of these sick white parties and whatever. Like this is how they're thinking about drugs and them being used. If you watch the movie Blink Twice, Zoe Kravitz says that she like spoke from her experience of being in Hollywood and seeing these communities where you basically could go and do something horrible to someone that was incapacitated because they were on drugs that were given to them without their knowledge. So the right is really imagining that a lot of these liberals with their hedonistic, Burning Man kind of vibe, or thinking that they're better than everyone else and being above the law and doing their drugs and being very reckless with their drugs and all this, they're associating that with a lack of morality. They're associating that with a lack of values around family and protecting children. If you can't understand that and speak to those concerns, you should not be thinking that you're fighting for psychedelic liberalization of psychedelics, because you need to be able to engage with people where they're at and understand what their concerns are. You can't, a problem I really see on the left is this constant diminishing or speaking in degrading ways about people on the right, instead of trying to recognize, hey, it sounds like this is your issue, you're pro-life, you feel this way, you think that race politics can become kind of a baiting issue. It sounds like you're feeling like we shouldn't have to talk about race, or shouldn't have to talk about bathrooms so much, and you're trying to extend an olive branch so that the person feels heard, so that you can engage with them about other subjects. That was the point, right? To maximize where we agree, right? And I'm hoping to talk to the Libertarian Party in Washington State recently, soon. I've spoken to them twice before at their statewide convention and things like that. And, when you talk to people like libertarians, they very much get like, keep your hands off my body, let me heal myself with plant medicines. So, you can bring people together if you at least will try to hear where the other side is at. Again, I tend to have a little bit of a saucy sense of humor, because I'm just kind of done at this point with trying to be nice. I don't know that we're going to get where we need to go in the psychedelic movement by being nice. And when I say not nice, it's like I need to speak candidly to kind of wake people up. We're done with the new approach, tromping people out there, these stock people that give their spiel, and they're like, look, we have an indigenous person, look, we have a veteran, plant medicine changed my life, blah, blah, blah. It's boring, right? We're ready for something else. We're ready for a movement. We're ready for something real. Give it to us real, right? Give something more to us. This is not enough. This is not doing it, right? This tactic is failing. Stop doing this. This is not working. It's boring, right? Boring. Blah, blah, blah. Boring. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. America is a nation of stories and storytellers. We are a product nation. And what do I mean by that? Show me the hero. Show me the story. Show me Odysseus. Show me Johnny Appleseed. Show me like Mike Jordan. Mike Jordan came from nothing, right? Black boy, right? Came from nothing. Middle class, what have you. Boom! His shoes are being sold all over the world. You got a product, you got a story, you got a hero, right? Trump, storyteller, loves to talk, loves to tell stories, right? Has lots of stories. And he's that underdog hero that the right identifies with, right? Because he's been done wrong by the establishment media, and by the courts, and a weaponized court system and whatever. So where is the product of the psychedelic movement? Where is the story? Show me the hero. Where is the hero in the psychedelic movement? I would say it's not Terence McKenna. I would say it's not Timothy Leary, right? You need someone who has a story, right? These are not people, when you talk about Terence and you talk about Timothy, who ever led a mainstream movement, right? When you talk about MLK Jr., there's a story there. When you talk about Malcolm X, there is a story there. I would argue that your hero for the psychedelic movement needs to be a bipartisan hero. A bipartisan hero that has a story, that can show you the product, right? That has a product for you. Something that you can visually see. So this is more of the same, I think. Show me the face, show me the product of the movement. Who is it? What does it look like? What can I put my hands in and on, right? Like, I'm an American, I need to visualize. I want people to help me get a reality show on leading in the political movement. This woman is supposed to have a sign about justice and like race and fighting for indigenous rights and all that. So these are the people that are currently like, well, I'm the face of the psychedelic movement. And I would say, no, you're the face of the underground, and you're satisfied selling your chocolates, and you're satisfied not getting busted because the feds don't really care about your chocolates because you're not threatening big pharma, and they'll let you do your thing because you're an entitled white woman, or whatever. But talking about new age stuff and the mysticism of plant medicine, that's not going to pull in, that's not a political strategy, right? In fact, I would say that's almost like an anti-political strategy. And this lady is telling me, well, we're winning because we're winning this fight on decriminalizing cities. And I'm like, yeah, big pharma doesn't care about that. That has no teeth. And they're thinking you're going to be satisfied with that, and you'll just go on your merry way, right? And this same person is like, attacking me because I'm doing an ibogaine event December 14th in New York City with some other folks about legalizing ibogaine, right? And it is attacking me to see if the wisdom carriers have given permission for us to be using this medicine. Meanwhile, we have thousands of people dying on the streets every day from addiction, right? And if you've ever lived in indigenous communities, you might know that a lot of times indigenous wisdom carriers don't necessarily agree with other people being labeled as the wisdom carriers. So I think it can be a very complex process to find that perfect wisdom carrier who wasn't somehow influenced by an outside party or propped up by some outside colonialist, or whether the people within that indigenous community even agree about that person being labeled that. And I also think if you truly understood ibogaine, there's ways to get derivatives and things regarding to ibogaine, get that same medicine in different ways that don't tap into communities. And also, not all ibogaine comes from Gabon. So I think just sometimes people get caught up in their social justice stuff and they don't realize the bigger picture of reaching Black and brown bodies and poor bodies that are institutionalized or that are dying on our streets at record numbers because we're in such a fucking drug crisis. And that's the issue, right? That's the issue, is people are dying every day and there's like a war afoot, right? So my harsh truth here is that you need conservatives to be on board. You need your message to be a message that works for conservatives, or you're not going to get them on board. So if you really care about legalization, and some of these people, their tactics and so forth, they maybe they want to sabotage legalization. but you need to take your identity politics out of the psychedelic legalization part of it in order for that medicine to go down. And then later on, if you want to open up a psychedelic center once it's legal and you want to focus on doing groundbreaking work with indigenous communities or having indigenous healers or offering scholarships to people of color that are lower income or uphold women or disabled people, you will have every opportunity to do that. Work on trans rights issues, you know, those are your opportunity to do that once it is legal, right? And once it is legal, you can get it in the hands of those people that are trapped in institutions that you may not be familiar with in your underground psychedelic culture. You may not be working with people that are in prisons. You may not be working with people on Medicaid who are poor, who are on food stamps, and who are under the jurisdiction of systems like courts and things like that, where they don't have the right to use psychedelic medicines. If you're in a halfway house, you can't use openly psychedelic medicines. If you are under the oversight of like mental health court, you can't actively use psychedelics legally, you know? So I think there's a lot of privilege and there's a lot of just implied bias around privilege that we see in the underground plant medicine community. So I have two different like little things here, right? There's like the plant medicine underground culture, which is they have this hubris. They think they don't need to cater to conservatives. They're like, no, conservatives need to cater to us. They need to get with our program, right? And they are happy with Decrim, right? Because they're thinking, oh, this is anti-racist, right? They've bought into this whole, like, this is the indigenous way, right? To keep it out of the hands of, the big bad white guy or the big bad white America or big bad white guy establishment, right? But they're not recognizing they are keeping it out of the hands of the poor who will only be able to access through Medicaid and through systems and who are under institutional oversight like prisons, jails, halfway houses, rehab programs, court systems, people that are on welfare, people that are involved in custody trials, things like that. So they think they're being politically savvy, but they're actually doing, I think, more harm than good, because as far as the political effort, they're not distinguishing their justice and their identity and their woke stuff from the political stuff and separating it and saying, well, that's going to be like this cultural stuff over here. That's going to be a community-based, like, project over here. But if I'm infusing that into the mainstream political message, then it's going to be seen as something that is a left-wing effort and not a bipartisan effort. And you can't win until you get it in the public's consciousness that this is a bipartisan effort, right? So the person in the bipartisan political plant medicine effort is going to be someone who realizes, hey, I've got the hippie vote, I've got the woke vote, I need to be focused on appealing to a person who doesn't understand psychedelics, who doesn't know what it is, who hasn't heard of it. This is new for them, and they just need information. They don't need a lot of social justice stuff. They don't need a lot of other concepts around whether they're worthy of using this medicine or whether they have like the medicine carrier's permission to use this medicine and all this. Like, to just allow this person without a lot of the other baggage understand and become familiarized with the medical and life-saving properties of psychedelics to meet this overwhelming drug epidemic that we have in our nation right now. Because if you look at the numbers dying, if you look at the numbers dying of suicide on the daily, we are in a war of death and crisis and addiction, and that should matter to you. And if you care about Black and brown bodies, look at the numbers dying from drug addiction, look at the numbers dying from alcoholism and from suicide. Like, if you need to somehow justify going more towards legalization, then look at the Black and brown bodies, the poor bodies that are impacted by not having legalization. Really do some deep thinking along those lines. So in order to have a political movement of any substance, right, We're talking political. We're not talking cultural underground healing circles, right? Those folks want to tell you that they're being political. I don't necessarily think they're actually being that political. I think they have a cultural healing movement in the underground that is largely meeting the needs of a very small subculture that tend to be very entitled liberal people, right? That's a niche, right? That's a little niche going on. But as far as a political leader in the mainstream, right? And, no offense to David Bronner, but he and his wife have explored different gender identities. That concept of being a liberal LA person with your wealthy background where you get to explore your gender and your identity and all that, I'm not even sure that that's the right face for the movement. If you're friends with someone, you could give them that feedback and you could be like, you need a different face for the movement that can engage with conservatives and speak their language, because you're not going to be able to get those people in a dress, right, as a man. Like, I'm just saying it, not to be mean, right, because I've got lots of friends that are trans and what have you, but just as a strategist, as a political strategist, like, look at what you're selling. If you're selling that people talk about David Bronner having parties at his house, right, that are like, everyone's getting naked and having a good time, that's, you need to be conscious of the message of who you are and the image you're sending, right? If you and your wife are exploring gender identity and switching up your genders and having free-for-alls and sex parties or people are, getting free and naked and hippie and all that, I'm not sure that's the voice that you need in order to show conservatives that this can be something for conservatives to engage in and feel like they're not being part of leftist values that they don't vibe with, right? So we just need to think realistically about how we're messaging here, right? What is the message? Who is the message? Show me the product, show me the story, show me the hero, right? The problem with psychedelic people is that, like I said, they are the high school kids who put their middle finger up at that principal and say, I want to be an individual, I get to wear a dress, I get to be myself, I get to be my own person and whatever. So the problem with that is, if you are organizing those people as I do, these are people that push back, that constantly challenge, that are very, very anti-authority, right? So that becomes challenging because if you look at Trump supporters, you can tell them like, hey, this guy like has been caught in charges for this, has been caught in charges for that, like things that conservatives normally would be like, no, like, but it does not matter. Why? Because they are just so in love with this flawed leader that they will justify his mistakes as contributing to further validation of his humanness, right? That they're just so in love with him and his story, right? His character, his facets, that they accept the burden of his imperfections, right? But in the psychedelic community, we're looking for this perfect leader, right? I get a lot of times complaints that I'm this or I'm that, and I'm like, hey, hold up, what the fuck? Like, why are you asking me to be a perfect leader? There's no such thing. And any political leader is going to have their warts and their issues and like, everything, right? So I get a little fed up because you need the kind of enthusiasm that folks have for Trump, but for a psychedelic leader that's bipartisan, right? But you need these fans, if you will, to be so in love with that leader that they're just like, I don't care. You told me she's racist and hates black people, and by the way, I don't hate black people. And so these folks that love to be out there and pin some other horrible thing on me, like I would just encourage you to get to know me, look at the work that I've done, that kind of thing, before you would think that that I'm this horrible person, right? Which is kind of sad that I even have to say that. But at this point, I understand that, like, on the daily, I'm receiving new allegations, and so I'm just trying to, roll with it, but also try to have a sense of humor because it's painful at times. But what I'm saying is these are a very particular type of people, and they're very much like to be individuals and like to express themselves and like to be who they are and don't like authority. So I think it's very hard to emphasize to them, you guys, in order to get the political movement to have significant weight, to change the nation in a way that will be meaningful to address the mental health crisis, address the kind of political crisis of the giant drug epidemic we have in our country and things like that, we are going to need to back a bipartisan psychedelic leader, psychedelic politician, right? But it's going to be someone that you are going to have to back, even when you hear those negative things, instead of being diverted and being like, oh, is this a flawed leader? Did they make a mistake? Oh no, like, well, that's it, we only want perfect leaders. Like, dude, you're not going to find a perfect leader. And I would argue that at this time, no one even wants a perfect leader, to be honest. People are craving authenticity. Everything I've read and watched about analysis of the psychedelic, sorry, not the psychedelic, but the political kind of what just happened as far as the elections and everything, is that the feedback is that people found Kamala to be vapid and one-dimensional, and that there wasn't an interesting story there. There wasn't someone that had flaws that made them laugh, made them dance. If you look at Trump, he often appears the fool and says foolish things and dances, and he's like this big, guy doing his moves, right? But the cute, polished, have all the answers leaders are out. We want realness. We want warts. We are craving authenticity. So the plant medicine community touting out people that seem to have their shit together and seem very professional or seem to give a nice spiel or a nice talk, that's boring at this point. We want some juice. We want some meat. We want to know, who is that person? How do they think? What are their flaws? How do they make mistakes? How do they fumble? How do they pick themselves back up again? What makes them sad? Who's come for them? Are they a hero? You know what I mean? Who are the bad guys? Like, they want a story, right? There needs to be a story, and right now there really isn't a story. So I often talk about how, for me, it's almost like there's a spiritual war afoot. Like, I think about sometimes what the craftiest and most evil, the most orchestrated kind of takedown mafia of the psychedelic, towards the psychedelic community to break it up and get it conflicted. And, I see everything out there. It's like gossip, there's rumors, there's defamation, there's character assassination. I believe there's agents, but they're like in the movement, like deep in the movement, but also high up, like lobbyists can be agents, you know what I mean, for someone. Like, you watch enough political drama shows, you kind of get a sense of like, big pharma's influencing this. The high school popularity games are influencing this. Slanderous articles. I've had a slanderous article written about me that I could sue about, but, I'll add it to my list, right? So understand, if you are a psychedelic leader in any way in this movement, you are going to be under attack, whether it's like spiritual attack or, whatever, but people are going to come for you, and they're going to be brutal. They're going to be mean. And I remember when I first started out 5 years ago, this dude that had a lot of money and was going to support me, but I think has some issues with women, or I don't know what his issues are. But he said to me at one point, you need to develop a thicker skin. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because I think sometimes it harms us to just be like, oh, okay, there's just more defamation coming my way, or there's more, random hatred coming my way, or someone new has decided to slam me and I met them for 5 minutes and they're claiming to have spent hours and weeks getting to know me, or having been part of my organization or something. And supposedly, Donald Trump now is supposedly so scared of people turning on him that he only has people that are blind loyalists, right? And I kind of get that mentality, right? Where you literally surround yourself with 5 people that you're death or glory, but we're together in the battle, and you've got my back and I've got your back. But like, just being really careful about those people that you have around you. And if people just keep giving red flags, I'm one of those people that sometimes it takes me a while, and I'll be like, wow, this person fucks up everything I hand to them as like a task, and they keep like, I don't know, saying bad things about me, but not actually doing anything in the movement, but talking about doing something in the movement. Like they're talking a lot about doing something in the movement, but they don't actually follow through with anything, right? It takes me a while sometimes to realize like, ooh, this person doesn't feel so good, or, I'm not feeling it. I don't feel safe, or they've just been too weird or whatever. And then strange things will happen where I will set that boundary finally and say, ooh, I just don't feel like working with you. Sorry. And then they'll come for me hard, like out of nowhere. I'll get calls that this person is spreading defamation or spreading bad gossip and saying what a horrible person I am to all these people. And I guess it hurts, right? But it's happened enough times that it's almost predictably boring, and it's like how it all like comes about, like the succession of it all, or whatever. But I don't know. For me, I think it comes down to having a sense of humor and also your faith. Like if you're a spiritual person, for me, I'm Jewish, for others, if you're Muslim, Christian, pagan, whatever, just that sense of faith. Like I have a really good friend who's like a hardcore Christian, and even though it's annoying, I'll call her up and ask for support, and we'll like, do a like little girls talk kind of thing. And she always wants to do a big prayer to Jesus, right? And it's not really like my faith per se, right? But she wants to do it, and we do it, right? But I just listen, right? Because a lot of the words are like the same, or it's like the same concepts of having trust in a higher power, having trust that that the angels or God, or in her case, Jesus, like everyone is coming together to help you, right? That they want you to be doing well. So yeah, I would just say faith and having a moral compass and having a bit of a backbone helps, but also having a sense of humor will get you through. I think having a sense of humor is really kind of like where the plant medicine has its beautiful wisdom, and where we kind of get that in our lives. Like I've worked a lot in the Native American community, and I've just had a lot of like Native American elders that have been role models for me, that are kind of like spiritual leaders in their community. Some of them have passed now, but a lot of times they were the jokey type, the Heyoka medicine type. So they would say things that were outlandish and crazy, and everyone like in their little community called them kind of a little bit nuts and that kind of thing. But they were fun, and they were authentic, and they were real, and they were kind of cutting through bullshit with their funny jokes that had like, some wisdom slipped in. And so the more we can be like that, I think the wiser we will be in the movement, right? Can we laugh at ourselves? Can we laugh at the movement? Can we laugh at the world and its chaos, and have a sense of humor, and see our own sticking our foot in our mouth, or seeing our own fumbling as part of our journey, and just own it, with a little bit more humor. I think that a lot of people in the plant medicine community take themselves very seriously, and they're very holy, and they're very whatever, and they're holding themselves up as like a great holy, plant medicine guru. It does get a little silly sometimes. I think we need to make fun of that to make it more palatable to the greater populace, because how humor works in this really divine, special way is it gets people laughing and finding commonalities. And so the more we can kind of make fun of plant medicine people in a nice way that also lets them see their own bullshit, the better it'll be for the world, because we will become more familiar with the psychedelic community, if that makes sense. So these are some of my ideas. Help Leo get a reality show on leading in the political movement with Netflix. I was working on that for a while, and it seemed to stymie, if that's a word. It's stymied. It became stymied. So that's like another big wish on my Hanukkah wish list. And then help me get on Joe Rogan or Sean Ryan or Tucker Carlson. And then how do we elevate conservatives in the movement? So infiltrate these groups, go into biker clubs, try to plant seeds, not in an obnoxious down your throat kind of way, but how do you plant seeds in gentle ways in those groups that are outside your bubble, right? Get outside your comfort zone, get outside of your echo chamber. You are not creating any change in your echo chamber. I'm part of all these signal groups that literally are just little echo chambers. And I'm just wondering, who do you think you're really changing? Nobody. You all seem to think the same. So no, this is not working. This is not creating significant change. Excuse me. Support your bipartisan leaders. It can be me, it can be someone else, but people that are really interested in bringing people together, not caught up in division. I'll talk to anyone, talk to the Trump supporter, I'll talk to the black anarchist, I'll talk to the veteran, I'll talk to the strong feminist, I'll talk to anyone, right? I'll talk to people from the Black Power movement, I'll talk to indigenous justice warriors, like I'll talk to anyone. So just being willing to really partner with everyone and keep your message consistent that you're here for everyone. You are not here to play favorites. You're not here to kind of like cater to one group over another. You're trying to meet that middle ground, right? Because you're literally trying to get the medicine to the masses, which ironically will reach more black and brown and poor bodies that are disproportionately affected by these systems that a lot of these entitled Decrim folks are just kind of, I think, out of touch with. So I've worked with folks in the prison system. I've worked with people in forced hospitalizations, forced mental hospitals, forced drug and alcohol treatment. So I have a real familiarity with these systems and how they don't work and how they are actually causing more harm. I think this is my last slide. I should see here real quick. Oh no, second to last slide. I just kind of want to lean into the ending and really kind of enjoy it. Things that I'm currently working on. I'm working on an event with Dana Beal for ACT UP for legalizing ibogaine. That's an ibogaine town hall, the first of its kind in New York City on December 14th. You can find the tickets on Eventbrite. There's a $15 donation that's requested. I'm working on a Bollywood dance party in Seattle for our last psychedelic fair, which was the largest in Washington State's history. We had a lot of Indians show up. I used to live in India briefly as a child, and so I'm looking for about a $6,000 donation to either our bill or our initiative, which you can go to the website adapt-wad.org, and you can find a link to the bill website there. But with both of those organizations, if I can raise $6,000 in the next couple months, I'm going to put on a big Bollywood dance party to celebrate the movement, but also get the word out to, we have a very large Indian population in the Seattle area in Bellevue that seem very interested in the psychedelics, and I want to encourage that and reach out to other communities. And also, I just like a good Bollywood dance party, you know, get down. And for those of you who haven't experienced Bollywood, it's a lot of fun. So yeah, and I'm working on my Adapt psilocybin bill for Washington State. You can go to adaptwabill.org to learn more. And we need 150K by the end of November, early December, in order to move forward with the next legislative session. I've got 2 lobbyists, one of which is Governor Inslee's former chief of staff. And so just looking for support. And in Washington State, there has not been a citizen-based initiative that has passed or gotten on the ballot at all since 2016 because the cost has become so prohibitive, which actually suppresses the democratic process if you think about it, because voters are not establishing their own laws. And a lot of these Democrats, even in the state legislature, are basically kind of, you know, in the hands of big pharma and things like that. They may not even vote for your psilocybin bill. So it's critical that we raise the $2 to $7 million to get our initiative passed. That's for 2026 and is modeled after Colorado's plant medicine initiative. So it's a legalization of psilocybin therapy and decriminalization of entheogens, which are psychedelic plant medicines at a very low amount that people would have for personal sacred plant medicine use. And then I'm working on some bigger ideas, which are, I'm trying to get some famous conservatives together. So if you know Elon Musk, if you know Joe Rogan, The gentleman who killed Osama bin Laden is a supporter of ibogaine therapy. So if you know any of these people, I'm trying to get a conservative group together to talk about psychedelics, to do a panel talk that I will feature on this YouTube channel. And it doesn't have to be that many, maybe like 4 would be fine, 3 to 4 of like the most famous conservatives out there that are into psychedelics, like Joe Rogan, like Sean Ryan, like Elon Musk, and I feel like that could really help shift the conversation. So, people say maybe she's a dreamer, but I literally think, people could take an hour out of their day and do that, and it could really help affect the movement. So that's part of my dream. I'm putting it out there. And then I have a march on Washington that I'm trying to do, and I don't want it led, right, by people that are like all about like, let's have Black, queer, disabled, people be the figurehead of that plant medicine march on Washington. I would say no, even though I have a great person who is queer, who is Black, who is disabled, to do an opening song and an opening talk and that kind of thing. But I really want the visual, and it's not about racism. It's about, we need to make these tough dudes, right? The Gabor Mates, who are universally liked by leftists and people on the right, people that are socially accepted in a bipartisan way, even maybe more leaning to the right, because right now the psychedelic community has been defined by these leftists, and we really need to shift it more to the right. So you have a march on Washington that is led by these people, right? So that this normalizes it for people who really kind of worship these people, who listen to these people. So by having those tough dudes lead that march, we're really asking them to step up. Gabor Mate, Joe Rogan, step up and lead us as we're doing that march on Washington in 2025. And so I'd like help with donors that can help support that. If you look at every other historical march on Washington, lots of organizations have stepped in to be donors. They've contributed bringing people there, busing people there, getting posters made, getting signs made, that kind of thing. But you want to show the world, hey, we do care about plant medicine. Yes, we can organize. Yes, we can put our differences aside, and we can all come together for a bipartisan plant medicine effort to show that this is a bipartisan health issue that affects everyone, that we want for everyone. So I think the optics of that could be huge in shifting the pendulum in our country, but we really need that to be well organized, and I want support for that. I don't want it to be something that is defined by leftists, right? With that being kind of the tip of the spear as you're doing that march on Washington, because then it lends further input to the idea that this is a leftist issue led by like angry cat ladies or whatever. And I'm not trying to be cruel, but like, that's not the vibe that we need right now. They already think it's been defined by Charlie Kirk as being a leftist run movement, and I'm asking that we shift that and change that and have it be a movement that is defined for everybody by uplifting those voices that we haven't seen. We haven't seen Joe Rogan step into more of a political activism role. Can we hit the pressure on him to do that, right? And then the last thing I'll mention is I did this microdose mushroom sit-in. It was covered by a newspaper in downtown Seattle. It was 200 to 300 people. We definitely had some feds show up, but it was like grandmas and grandpas with their coolers. And the reason that this is such a brilliant concept is I'm trying to organize people to do microdose mushroom sit-ins around the world now. It's low cost. It allows people to visualize, and this is where we are going to really change people's minds. What does it mean to do psychedelics? If you can show people, right, take the mystery out of it, take it out of the closet, that they're using these microdose mushrooms in ways that are safe, like Prozac, like your daily Prozac pill. So because we are such a product nation, as I mentioned before, with like the Nike shoe and Michael Jordan, like we need to see what the psychedelic movement looks like, not behind the scenes, not on your special retreat. We need to see it like in real time. So that's why it's important, but also it kind of plays on Americans love gossip. They love like sensationalism, right? And so it sounds crazy, right? A microdose mushroom sit-in, oh my God. But when you go, it's like Native American like water activists, or like a DJ, or like the Libertarian Party, and like someone giving a talk about getting off of hard drugs, and like a musician, and then like a peace activist. And it's chill, right? And it's grandma and grandpa with their cooler and their little foo-foo dogs and their grandkids with them, right? So it's safe and it's family oriented. That shifts the concept then on a broader scale to the populace on, hey, what is the psychedelic movement, right? And it's a low cost way. And getting psychedelic activists to do something is hard, I'll be honest. And getting them motivated to do something that doesn't involve like getting free, chocolates, or having access to chocolates at an underground fair or whatever, getting them to actually do something, put their bodies on the line, right? It's hard to do that. But a microdose mushroom sit-in, it's like 5 or 6 hours. You ask them to show up with a lawn chair, and they can go around and make bubbles or face art, like a peace festival, I guess. So that is where you can get those activists who talk a lot about caring about the movement, but a lot of times what they care about is their individualized thing, their individualized, little project they have to have their retreat center or whatever. So this gets people being activists in a way that you can squeeze some activism out of them when they may not be as big of an activist as you might think. Okay, this is our very last slide, and then we'll move to a discussion. So, like I mentioned, I think it's actually very creative to try to infiltrate conservative psychedelic groups, or conservative groups in general, and then drop your psychedelic stuff. So if you have a Joe Rogan psychedelic clip, if you have a Tucker Carlson, he had toured with the Dead when he was younger. Excuse me, a lot of people don't know that about him. So if you can try to find clips about conservatives talking about psychedelics, like the guy who killed Osama bin Laden talking about ibogaine and supporting legal ibogaine, just try to drop those information in those conservative groups to try to help sway them, because otherwise you're staying in your psychedelic bubble where it's an echo chamber. If you're in Facebook in a psychedelic group, everyone in the psychedelic group is into psychedelics and wants to learn about psychedelics. That's not a group that you're going to really shift and change a lot of opinions, most likely, right? Someone's not going to join that group unless they're already interested and curious and want to learn more. You need to branch out of those communities, reach out to other communities, drop those little seeds. And it doesn't need to be super offensive. It can be like, oh, look at this cool video. I just happen to be in a conservative group and I'm dropping this interesting video about psychedelics. Hey guys, because we all love, Sean Ryan. We all love Tucker Carlson. We all love Joe Rogan. We all love Elon Musk or something. And maybe you don't, right? But you're just dropping the information. So you're being a conduit to get the information to people who will not listen unless it's someone that they trust, that they see of as being a person of value that they can listen to. They're not going to listen to a liberal that's coming at them with preaching to them about like leftist values or what have you. That's when their ears shut down. So you need to think about how you're going to reach these people, right? And this is just for anyone who's actually doing that hard work of the political work in the movement. You know what I mean? I've had people tell me all kinds of stories of feeling like strange things have happened to them and they're under attack, or people are trying to cancel them, or people are spreading misinformation about them, or just all kinds of things, particularly if they're doing political work. And I'm not talking about the underground, I'm the plant healing lady, I'm here for everyone and I can sell you chocolates. Like, that person is going to be well loved no matter what, right? Because they got chocolates, right? I don't got no chocolates. I will never have chocolates. Don't ask me for chocolates. So you're just know that yes, I'm validating for you. Yes, you're probably receiving some form of, there's some folks that are coming against you that you may not realize, and they may be trying to cancel you or spread distrust, or that any good leader is going to be hated. Basically, any leader any leader of any substance, right, is going to experience hate. And hate, I think, can be a hard energy to handle, right? Because you're like, why am I being hated? But the addiction industry, the cartels, the fentanyl pushers, the prisons, right? They hate you because you're trying to do good and you're trying to save people with these medicines, and they do not want these people saved. They want to keep that addiction industry alive, the prison industry alive. They want the people filling up the prisons. They want the people having chronic addiction and sucking down the alcohol and all of it. And so you're coming up against them. So yeah, you're going to be hated, and, you know, stay positive. Keep your sense of humor. Keep your sense of humor. Because ultimately, deep down, people are really drawn to people who can laugh at themselves, right? Who can see their own silliness, who can see their own comedy, you know, within themselves, and can poke fun at themselves, right? Like, people who try to act perfect and like they've got it all sorted out, and the plant medicines have completely made them into like people that are in touch with God and all this stuff. Like, I don't know, it just becomes a little obnoxious, and it, you know, those people seem like they're kind of full of themselves, right? For me, I want the healer who's like, oh my God, I just got raspberry jam all over my shirt. You know what I mean? I'm kind of a bumbling fool in that way. But at least I can laugh at it and be like, oh, I'm making such a mess of myself, right? We're in a time where people deeply need to identify with people that feel real, that feel relatable. If someone comes to me and they're a holier than thou, have it all together, have had their enlightenment, you know what I mean? They're just like a plant medicine guru or something. That's not relatable to me. I need to understand that someone is a character and that they have faults just like I have faults. And I can relate with them because they have bad days, just like I have bad days. They have problems in their life, just like I have problems in my life. Like, you know, and so I think there's a human value to that. And when you participate in the plant medicine movement with joining onto the latest kind of cult craze of canceling, as I call it, this train going around of who's the latest person to cancel or who's the coolest person in the hip plant medicine community, you know, popularity club, you're participating in something which intrinsically has a lot of negativity. I think I like the old school kind of beatnik generation kind of vibe, you know, the Jack Kerouac kind of vibe of I'm okay with being the outsider, right? Because what I'm seeing right now is the outsider's doing quite well. The outsider is someone that is not necessarily supported by the establishment in a time when there's rampant distrust of the establishment media, of establishment politicians, and throwing money at problems. I think where you're going to see a lot more excitement and support is people that are outside the norm of that perfect model of that crafted, constructed, perfect face. That we're ready for some realness, and we're ready for people that are keeping it real. Authenticity is basically the name of the game. And until next time, August 11th, I have an event on Adapt YouTube, which we will be live streaming, featuring doctors, pharmacists, and nurses talking about the psychedelic movement. And I'll try to put a link in the description for this video about that event, but that is, December 11th. Not sure if I said that. 6 to 7 p.m. and it's a psilocybin town hall. You can attend that even if you aren't in Washington State, but it is geared because it's being sponsored by several psychedelic communities in Washington State. It is kind of geared towards the Washington State voter, but of course, if you're in another state, feel free to join, asking questions. We've got doctors that are like on the front lines of the drug epidemic that are in the emergency rooms at the hospitals in the cities. We've got a very well-renowned mushroom nurse who is a nurse who has become a plant medicine activist, and she's got a platform on TikTok and has gained a lot of notoriety and really come out of the closet. Other people that are, one guy is a pharmacist with a plant medicine podcast that he does. He actually lost his job, I think, related to being out of the closet as a plant medicine activist, so has experienced that direct discrimination that I spoke to in this talk and lecture. And then another woman is someone I think who's been part of some of these psilocybin training programs and modules that you see out there that are giving accreditation. So it's more of like for the average voter who has questions about psilocybin therapy and the impact of psilocybin as it relates to health, mental health, addiction, and where it differs from like doing it in the underground versus doing it in kind of a therapeutic model for people who have questions. And I believe people have a right to do it in both environments. If someone wants to do it in a legal way with a therapist and a doctor, they have every right to ask for that. And there should be no shaming, which I sometimes see in the decriminalization community, for someone who wants to do it legally with a doctor. That's their right. And so I just don't appreciate the shaming that happens out there for those folks. Just like if someone has been doing it since the 60s and they feel comfortable, they know how to go pick psilocybin, it grows naturally in the Pacific Northwest, and they want to go hang with Paul Stamets and do it around the fire some weekend, cool. That's your right. You know, I believe that you have that right to do that. So anyway, okay, let's get going in our conversation. But I enjoy the movement. I don't want folks to get the impression I don't enjoy the movement. I do enjoy the movement. I just also kind of feel like I needed to have a tough talk with folks who may not be understanding why we're failing, and I just really want us to rally more and be more strategic and be smarter in how we are achieving our goals here, because I feel like we've missed the mark and we still have a limited window. And maybe if RFK Jr. really is serious with his team asking for my resume, I'll be able to get this lecture out on a much larger level and just kind of enjoy interacting with folks and having more support as I reach a larger audience, you know. But hopefully I will keep my sense of humor, keep it real, and stay authentic and all that good stuff. So have a wonderful evening, and let's get going with our discussion.